Welcome to Eternal Darkness, where nightmares come to life. I'll be your host through these twisted tales tonight. Before we descend into the shadows, remember to like and subscribe to join our growing community of horror enthusiasts. Get comfortable, turn down the lights, and prepare yourself as we begin our journey into the unknown. My name is Dr. Fernando Castillo, and for 17 years I served with the National Parks Administration here in Argentina. During that time, I was stationed across our vast country, but the majority of my career was spent in a region known as Gran Chaco. The Chaco Plains, as some English speakers call them, stretch across several South American nations, a sprawling expanse of semi-arid lowlands that contains an extraordinary diversity of ecosystems. Within this single region, you can find everything from thorny scrublands and savannas to subtropical forests thick with humidity, palm groves that rustle in the hot wind, and wetlands that teem with life, both beautiful and dangerous. Gran Chaco is home to thousands of species found nowhere else on Earth. The forests there hold jaguars, tapirs, giant anteaters, and countless birds whose calls echo through the canopy at dawn and dusk. It is one of the most magnificent places I have ever known. But since the 1970s, this paradise has been under siege. Illegal logging operations have carved deep wounds into the forest, felling ancient trees for profit. Cattle ranchers, hungry for more grazing land, deliberately set fires that consume thousands upon thousands of hectares each year. In my final year of service alone, Gran Chaco lost an area of forest larger than some European countries. I witnessed the devastation firsthand. The blackened stumps where century-old trees once stood. The displaced wildlife wandering through ash-covered clearings. The streams choked with silt and debris. The greed of men had transformed sections of this wilderness into a wasteland, but as heartbreaking as that destruction was, I would come to learn that human greed had scarred Gran Chaco in ways far worse than environmental damage. I would discover that the forest held secrets that made illegal logging seem almost innocent by comparison. Of all the things I witnessed during my time in Gran Chaco, one discovery haunts me more than any other. It visits me in the quiet hours before dawn, when the world is still and my mind cannot distract itself with the business of the day. It returns to me in nightmares that leave me gasping for breath, my sheets soaked with sweat, my heart hammering against my ribs as if trying to escape my chest. This is the story of what I found in those woods during the late summer of 1991. It was February when I set out that morning, and the heat was already oppressive by the time I left Puerto Esperanza. The sun bore down on the dirt road as I drove my all-terrain vehicle northward, following coordinates I had marked on my survey map the previous week. My mission was straightforward: travel approximately 20 miles north to inspect a section of forest that satellite imagery suggested might be intact, verify its condition, and document any signs of illegal logging activity. The journey took me across terrain that seemed to stretch endlessly in all directions. The scrubland here was flat and desolate, broken only by the occasional twisted tree that had somehow found enough water to survive. The ground was hard-packed earth mixed with thorny brush that caught at my boots whenever I stopped to check my compass. The landscape shimmered in the heat, creating mirages that danced along the horizon. Several times I thought I saw water ahead, only to watch it dissolve into nothing as I approached. When I finally reached the forest edge, the relief was immediate. The temperature dropped noticeably as I entered the shade of the canopy. This section of Gran Chaco was dominated by algarrobo trees, their twisted trunks and spreading branches creating a dense overhead cover. Interspersed among them were pink trumpet trees, their bark smooth and their branches reaching upward like skeletal fingers. The algarrobo trees were particularly valuable to illegal loggers. Their wood was prized for furniture and flooring, which made them constant targets. That was precisely why I needed to verify this forest's condition. I killed the engine of my ATV and sat for a moment in the sudden quiet, listening to the sounds of the forest awakening around me. Birds called from hidden perches. Insects hummed in the undergrowth. Somewhere in the distance I heard the distinctive howl of a monkey, probably a black howler, judging by the deep guttural sound that seemed to reverberate through the trees themselves. I pulled out my notebook, checked my equipment, and began walking into the forest proper. The ground here was uneven, covered in fallen leaves, twisted roots, and branches in various states of decay. There were no established trails, no clear paths worn by human feet. This was exactly what I wanted to see. Evidence that the forest remained largely undisturbed by loggers. My work required me to travel through such untouched areas regularly, documenting their condition and marking them on official maps so they could be properly protected. For the next hour, I moved through the forest methodically, pausing every few meters to make notes about the tree's condition, the density of the canopy, and any signs of human activity. I photographed several particularly impressive Algarobo specimens, their trunks so thick that 3 men standing with linked arms could not have encircled them. I marked waypoints on my map, creating a detailed record of the forest's layout and composition. Everything appeared to be in excellent condition. There were no fresh stumps, no tire tracks, no discarded equipment or trash that would indicate loggers had been working in the area. The forest was healthy and thriving, exactly as it should be. Satisfied with my survey, I began making my way back toward where I had left the ATV. The return journey was when it happened. Gran Chaco's forests are wild and untamed, lacking the convenience of maintained trails. Even experienced rangers like myself occasionally lose their footing among the maze of roots, rocks, and fallen timber that litter the forest floor. I had stumbled many times before. It was simply part of the job. Usually I would catch myself with an outstretched hand or at worst suffer a scraped palm or bruised knee. But this time was different. I had just hopped over a thick branch that had fallen across my path when my boot caught on something hidden in the knee-high grass beyond. I was completely off balance, my weight already committed to the jump, with no way to catch myself. I pitched forward, my arms windmilling uselessly as I fell face first toward the ground. The sound when I landed was wrong. It was not the soft thud of impacting dirt and vegetation. It was a sharp, brittle crunch, the sound of something breaking, splintering under my weight. The impact drove the air from my lungs and sent jolts of pain shooting through my forearms and elbows as I instinctively tried to break my fall. I lay there for several seconds, stunned and gasping for breath. My first concern was my own injuries. I pushed myself up carefully and examined my arms. The sleeves of my shirt were torn, and underneath I could see fresh scrapes oozing blood. My elbows throbbed, and I could already feel bruises forming, but nothing seemed seriously damaged. I had been fortunate. Only then did I look down to see what I had landed on. At first, my mind refused to process what my eyes were seeing. The objects beneath me were pale, almost white, scattered among the dark earth and green grass like fragments of driftwood. But they were too smooth to be wood, too deliberately shaped. As my vision cleared and my brain finally accepted the reality before me, the truth crashed down on me with the force of a physical blow. Bones. I had landed on human bones. I scrambled backward, my boots digging into the soft earth as I pushed myself away from the remains. My hands were shaking. I could see them trembling in front of me as if they belonged to someone else. I crossed myself, whispering a prayer under my breath, an automatic response drilled into me since childhood. But the prayer did nothing to steady my nerves or slow my racing heart. The bones were scattered across an area about 2 meters in diameter. Many were partially buried, half swallowed by the earth and overgrown with moss and lichen. The grass had grown up through and around them, creating a grotesque natural display. I could see clearly now what I had landed on. A rib cage. Its curved bones cracked where my weight had come down on them. Nearby lay an arm bone, and beyond that, partially hidden in the vegetation, I spotted the unmistakable curve of a human skull. Its empty eye sockets seemed to stare directly at me. I forced myself to breathe slowly, trying to calm the panic that threatened to overwhelm me. I had seen human remains before, twice, in fact, during my years with the Parks Administration. Both times had been during official search operations, looking for missing persons who had wandered into the wilderness and never returned. Both times the bodies had been relatively fresh, identifiable, and expected. This was entirely different. These bones were old, clearly having lain here for years. The skull was discolored, covered in patches of moss that grew in the empty sockets and nasal cavity. The jaw hung at an odd angle, some teeth missing, others blackened with age. Tatters of clothing still clung to some of the bones. I could see what looked like the rotted remains of a shirt or jacket, and near the feet a boot, its leather cracked and worn, had somehow survived the years of exposure to the elements. I stood on shaking legs and began to carefully flatten the grass around the skeleton, trying to see its full extent. As I worked, moving slowly and methodically to avoid disturbing the remains further, I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. How had this person died out here? Had they been lost, like the others I had helped search for? Had they suffered some accident or medical emergency that left them unable to call for help? Then my boot came down on something hard. I lifted my foot slowly, already knowing, already dreading what I would find. More bones protruded from the earth where I had stepped. Another skeleton. This one lying just 3 meters from the first. My stomach twisted into a knot so tight I thought I might vomit. 2 sets of remains, both in advanced states of decomposition, both lying within meters of each other in the middle of an isolated forest. The fear that gripped me then was primal and overwhelming. My hands would not stop shaking. My mouth had gone completely dry. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, to flee this place as fast as my legs could carry me. Whatever had killed these people might still be here. I imagined unseen eyes watching me from the shadows between the trees, waiting for the right moment to strike. But I could not run. Not yet. I needed to understand what I was looking at. I began walking in a slow circle around the 2 skeletons, my eyes scanning the ground carefully with each step. The forest floor here was relatively flat, covered in the same knee-high grass and scattered debris as everywhere else in Gran Chaco. But as I walked, as I looked more carefully, I began to see them everywhere. A 3rd skeleton lay 5 meters to my left, this one almost completely buried, with only the dome of a skull visible above the grass and dirt. A 4th was 7 meters ahead, sprawled in an unnatural position, limbs scattered as if the body had been torn apart. A 5th, a 6th, a 7th. They were everywhere. In every direction I looked, I found more remains. Some were relatively intact, lying in positions that suggested they had simply fallen and never risen. Others were scattered across wide areas, bones separated and strewn about as if by animals or the simple passage of time. Skulls stared up at me from their earthen graves. Hands reached toward the sky, frozen in final gestures of desperation or prayer. The realization of what I was standing in the middle of hit me like a hammer blow. This was not an isolated tragedy. This was not 2 or 3 unfortunate souls who had somehow met their end in the same location. This was a massacre, a killing field, a cemetery without markers, without prayers, without anyone to remember the dead. I counted at least 15 distinct sets of remains within a 100-meter radius, and I knew there must be more hidden deeper in the undergrowth, beneath the accumulated layers of leaves and soil, waiting to be discovered. Some of the skeletons had remnants of modern clothing still clinging to them, sneakers with rubber soles that had resisted decay, belt buckles corroded green with age, the rusted zipper of a jacket lying next to a collection of ribs. These were not ancient remains. These people had died in living memory, probably within the last few decades. They had been wearing modern shoes, modern clothes. They had been alive when I was alive, breathing the same air, living in the same world. And now they were here, abandoned and forgotten, left to rot in the wilderness like they had never existed at all. My hands clutched at the notebook I carried, my knuckles white from the force of my grip. The terror I felt was beyond anything I had experienced before. It crawled up my spine like insects, made my skin prickle with cold despite the humid heat of the forest. I wanted to scream, to break the oppressive silence that seemed to press down on me from all sides, but I could not make a sound beyond my own ragged breathing. I had to leave. I had to get out of this place immediately, before whatever evil had been done here could claim me too. But I forced myself to move carefully, to watch each step, terrified of disturbing more remains. The last thing I wanted was to step on another skull, to hear that horrible crunch again, to look down and see more empty eye sockets staring up at me accusingly. The walk back to my ATV felt like it took hours, though it could only have been minutes. Every shadow seemed to hide something sinister. Every crack of a branch made me flinch and spin around, expecting to see someone or something approaching from behind. The birds had gone quiet. The monkey calls had ceased. Even the insects seemed to have fallen silent, as if the entire forest was holding itself in stillness, waiting to see what would happen next. When I finally reached the ATV, I climbed on with trembling hands and fumbled with the ignition. The engine roared to life, sounding impossibly loud in the quiet forest, and I did not waste a second before turning the vehicle around and accelerating back toward Puerto Esperanza. I drove recklessly, faster than was safe on the rough terrain, branches whipping past my face, thorns tearing at my clothes. I did not care. All that mattered was putting distance between myself and that terrible place. The image of those skeletons was burned into my mind. I could still see them when I blinked, the scattered bones, the empty skulls, the rotted remnants of clothing that proved these had been real people with real lives. The sheer number of them overwhelmed me. 15, maybe 20, possibly more. How many families had grieved for these missing people? How many mothers had waited for children who would never come home? How many questions had gone unanswered for years? By the time I reached Puerto Esperanza, the sun was beginning to set. The town was small, home to perhaps 2,000 people, built around the intersection of two dirt roads that ran through Gran Chaco. Our Parks Administration station was located on the northern edge of town, a modest building that served as headquarters for our regional operations. I parked the ATV outside and stumbled into the office, my clothes torn and dirty, my arms still bleeding from the fall, my face probably white as a sheet. The station chief, a man named Gustavo Hernandez who had worked for the administration even longer than I had, looked up from his desk with immediate concern. "Fernando, what happened? You look like you've seen a ghost." His words struck me as darkly appropriate. In a way, I had seen ghosts, or at least the remains they left behind. I told him everything. The survey of the forest, the fall, the bones, the horrifying discovery that they were not alone but surrounded by more remains. I described the scene in as much detail as I could manage, though my voice shook throughout the entire account. Gustavo listened in growing horror, his expression transforming from concern to shock to grim determination. When I finished, he stood up immediately. "Show me." "What?" "I need to see this for myself, Fernando. If what you're describing is real and I believe you, then we have a responsibility to report it properly. We need to document the location, the number of remains if possible, any identifying details. The authorities will need all of that information." I did not want to go back. The thought of returning to that forest, to that killing field, filled me with dread so intense I felt physically ill. But Gustavo was right. This was our duty. Those people deserved to be found, to be identified, to be returned to their families if possible. They deserved better than to lie forgotten in the wilderness forever. We drove back in Gustavo's vehicle, arriving at the forest as twilight was giving way to true darkness. I led him to the site, moving more confidently now that I knew what to expect, but still feeling that same cold fear settling over me as we approached. Gustavo brought a powerful flashlight, and we used it to examine the scene. His reaction mirrored my own. Shock, horror, and a deep sadness that seemed to settle over both of us like a heavy blanket. We moved carefully through the area, counting what we could see, taking notes, marking the approximate locations on a map. By the time we finished our preliminary survey, we had identified at least 22 distinct sets of remains. Before we left, Gustavo suggested we pray. We stood there in the darkness, surrounded by the dead, and recited a prayer for their souls. I am not an especially religious man, but in that moment, it felt necessary and right. These people had died alone, afraid, forgotten. The least we could do was acknowledge their existence, their humanity, before leaving them once more to the forest. After that night, the investigation passed into the hands of the federal police, Argentina's equivalent to what Americans call the FBI. In coordination with our Parks Administration, they launched a full forensic examination of the site. It took weeks to carefully excavate and recover all the remains. In the end, they found 28 complete or partial skeletons scattered across that section of forest. What they discovered about how those people died still haunts me. From roughly 1975 to 1983, the Argentine government participated in a coordinated program with several other South American nations called Operation Condor. The official purpose was to combat communism and left-wing movements in the region. The reality was far darker. Security services across the continent engaged in widespread kidnapping, torture, and murder of anyone deemed politically undesirable. Activists, students, union organizers, journalists, teachers, even some who had done nothing more than attend a protest or sign a petition. Among the tactics employed by Argentine security forces was something they called los vuelos de la muerte, the death flights. Prisoners would be loaded onto military aircraft or helicopters flown out over remote areas like Gran Chaco, and then thrown alive from the aircraft to fall to their deaths. It was a systematic program of murder disguised as disappearances. Thousands of people died this way. Their bodies were never meant to be found, their fates never meant to be discovered. But time and chance have a way of revealing even the most carefully hidden secrets. Those people I found had been thrown from an aircraft sometime in the early 1980s, based on the dating of the remains and the items found with them. They fell from the sky, alone and terrified, and died on impact in that isolated forest. For years, their families had no idea what happened to them, where they had gone, whether they were alive or dead. The federal police were able to identify some of the remains through dental records and personal effects. Families were notified. Some of the dead were finally returned home for proper burial. It was small comfort, I suppose, but at least those families finally had answers, finally had closure after decades of not knowing. As for me, I continued working for the Parks Administration for several more months before finally retiring. I had given 17 years to protecting Gran Chaco's forests and wildlife, and I was proud of that work. But after that day, something changed for me. The forest no longer felt like the sanctuary it once had. Every time I walked among the trees, I wondered what other secrets they held, what other horrors might be hidden beneath the leaf litter and undergrowth. Even now, years later, the nightmares come. I dream of falling through darkness, wind rushing past me, the ground approaching impossibly fast. I dream of empty eye sockets staring up at me from beneath the grass. I dream of voices calling out in the darkness, voices that belong to the dead, voices asking why they were forgotten, why they were left to rot alone in the wilderness. I helped bring some of those lost souls home. I helped give their families the closure they desperately needed, and for that I am grateful. But the price was high. The images I saw that day in Gran Chaco are etched into my memory forever. The terror I felt standing in that killing field surrounded by the evidence of systematic murder, wondering if I would be next, is something I will carry with me until my own death. And sometimes, in the darkest hours of the night, I wonder how many more remain unfound, how many other forests hide similar secrets, how many other families still wait for answers that may never come. These questions haunt me more than any nightmare ever could. God rest their souls, all of them. I arrived in Sedona on the last Tuesday of October, when the summer heat had finally broken and the tourist season was winding down. The rental cabin I'd booked sat on the outskirts of town, a small A-frame with a view of the red rocks that glowed like embers at sunset. I'd been planning this trip for months, a solo hiking expedition to clear my head after a brutal year at work. My therapist had suggested it. Time alone, she said, to reconnect with myself away from the noise of the city. West Fork Oak Creek had been on my list for years. I'd seen countless photos online. Brilliant fall foliage reflected in crystal clear water, towering canyon walls that seemed to cradle the trail in their ancient arms. The reviews all mentioned the crowds though, so I'd deliberately chosen late October, hoping the hordes of weekend warriors and Instagram seekers would have thinned out. That morning I'd stopped at a small market on Highway 89A to grab water and trail mix. The place was cramped and dim, smelling of old wood and coffee that had been sitting too long on the burner. An older woman worked the register, her weathered hands moving mechanically as she scanned my items. She had that local look, sun-damaged skin, eyes that had seen too many seasons, a wariness that comes from living in a place where nature still makes the rules. "Hiking today?" she asked, her voice rough as sandpaper. "Yeah, West Fork," I replied, pulling out my wallet. "Supposed to be beautiful this time of year." Her hands paused. She looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not concern. Exactly. Something harder than that. "You planning to be out there late?" "No. Just a few hours. In and out before dark." She nodded slowly, then leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping. "Good. Don't be in that canyon after the sun drops behind the rim. Things out there, they call your name. They sound like people you know, but they're not." She held my gaze for a long moment. "If you hear your name and you're alone, don't answer. Just get out." I gave her what I hoped was a reassuring smile. The kind you give people who watch too many paranormal shows. "I'll be careful. I've done plenty of solo hiking." "I'm sure you have." She handed me my receipt but didn't let go right away. "Just remember what I said. Be out before dark." As I left the store, I felt a prickle of unease that I immediately tried to rationalize away. Local color, I told myself. Every remote hiking area has its stories. Tales meant to keep tourists cautious, to add a little thrill to their adventure. I'd heard similar warnings before, about everything from mountain lions to abandoned mines. Besides, I'd heard the word, skinwalker, thrown around in online forums, always in that breathless way people talk about urban legends they don't really believe in. Stories to fill silence around campfires. But as I drove up 89A toward the trailhead, her words kept circling back. They sound like people you know. The Call of the Canyon Day use area was nearly empty when I pulled in around noon. Just 2 other vehicles in the lot. A mud-splattered Jeep and a sedan with California plates. I paid my $8 at the self-service kiosk, shouldered my day pack and checked my phone one last time. Full battery but only 1 bar of service that flickered and died as I approached the trailhead. The little footbridge spanned Oak Creek just beyond the parking area, a sturdy wooden structure that thrummed slightly under my boots. The water below ran clear and cold, rushing over smooth stones worn down by centuries of current. I paused at the far end to tighten my bootlaces and adjust my pack straps, taking a moment to appreciate the view. Red Canyon walls rose on either side, their faces striated with layers of geological time, rust and cream and burnt orange. Cottonwood trees lined the banks, their leaves turning that brilliant gold that only happens for a brief window each fall. The plan was simple and conservative. Follow Trail 108 for a few miles. Shoot some long exposure photographs where the leaves gathered in the slow pools. Maybe find a good spot to eat lunch. Then turn around by 3:30 at the latest. That would put me back at the car by 5, well before the 6:15 sunset. I'm methodical about my hiking. I always have been. I carry the 10 essentials, I check weather reports, I tell people where I'm going. Except I hadn't told anyone I was here. My phone had no service. And I'd left before remembering to text my brother. It was a stupid oversight. The kind of thing you don't realize matters until it does. The first mile of trail lived up to its reputation. The path was wide and well-maintained, packed dirt that showed the passage of countless boots. I crossed the creek 3 times in that first stretch, boulder hopping where I could, wading through ankle-deep water where I couldn't. The cold made me gasp at first, snowmelt from higher elevations still feeding the stream even this late in the season. But it was invigorating, that shock of cold that makes you feel awake and alive. I passed the stone remnants of what a trail sign identified as the old Mayhew Lodge, built back in the 1920s when this canyon was someone's idea of a resort destination. Now just tumbled walls and a foundation being slowly reclaimed by moss and falling leaves. Something about abandoned places in the wilderness has always unsettled me. The way nature erases human effort so completely, so efficiently. We think we're permanent, but we're not. Beyond the ruins, the canyon began to narrow. The walls rose higher, boxing in the light, and the temperature dropped noticeably. I found myself pulling my fleece out of my pack earlier than I'd expected. The shade here had weight to it, a thickness that felt almost tangible. I told myself it was just the canyon effect. Cold air pooled at the bottom, cut off from direct sunlight for most of the day. I started counting crossings out of habit, a trick I'd picked up years ago to help pace myself and establish turnaround points. 1, 2, 3. The rhythm of it was soothing, meditative. By the 6th crossing, I was deep enough into the canyon that the sound of the highway had vanished completely, replaced by the constant murmur of water and the occasional scrape of wind through the cottonwoods. That's where I saw the tracks. The sandbar was broad and flat, positioned at a bend where the creek had deposited decades of fine sediment. Fresh boot prints traced across it, probably from hikers earlier that morning when I'd still been drinking coffee at my cabin. The treads were clear, recent, not yet softened by the wind. But it was the other tracks that made me stop. Elk tracks, large and deep, moved alongside the boot prints for several feet. 4-toed impressions pressed into the damp sand, each one sharp-edged and distinct. I'd seen plenty of elk sign before. I knew what they looked like. These were fresh too, probably from the previous night when the animals came down to drink. What bothered me was the way they pivoted. Midway across the sandbar, the elk tracks suddenly kinked. Not gradually, the way an animal naturally changes direction, but sharply. The hoof prints didn't blur or drag. They simply pointed in a different direction. All 4 hooves lifted and reset at an angle that didn't make sense for an animal's gait. Then they traced back the exact way they'd come. each print placed with uncanny precision beside its outbound twin. I crouched down, studying the pattern. The sand around the prints showed no scuff marks, no evidence of the animal stumbling or being startled. It was as if the elk had simply reversed its own footsteps, walking backward without turning around. A cold finger of unease traced down my back. I told myself the creek must have undercut the sandbar, distorting the prints in some way I wasn't seeing. Or maybe I was misreading the sign entirely. I'm not a professional tracker, but even as I rationalized it, some older part of my brain was sending warning signals that I couldn't quite silence. I stood and kept walking, but I found myself checking over my shoulder more often than I had before. The 7th crossing came quickly, and then the 8th. The canyon walls were close enough now that I had to crane my neck to see the rim. The light had that blue-gray quality of deep shade, and the temperature continued to drop. I could see my breath when I exhaled. That's when it happened the first time. I was standing knee-deep in the creek, angle-stepping across to avoid the deeper channel, when someone said my name. Not shouted, not whispered, just said it, clearly, from across the water, maybe 20 feet away, where a tongue of gravel met the far bank. The voice was my brother's. Not similar to his voice. Not a close approximation. It was exactly his voice. The specific timbre and rhythm. The way he lands hard on the last syllable like he's trying to get my attention without actually shouting. That slightly amused tone he uses when he's about to tell me I'm overthinking something. My head snapped up. I scanned the gravel bar, the brush beyond it, the shadows under the overhanging cottonwood roots. Nothing. No one. Hello? My voice sounded small in the canyon, quickly absorbed by the sound of rushing water. No response. Just the creek, and the whisper of wind in the high branches, and my own pulse beginning to hammer in my ears. I stood there in the water for a long moment, waiting. My brother was 2 states away, sitting at his desk in a climate-controlled office, probably on his 3rd cup of coffee. He wasn't here. He couldn't be here. I hadn't told him I was coming to Sedona. The rational part of my brain immediately began constructing explanations. Sound does strange things in canyons. Echoes can carry for miles, bouncing off walls, bending around obstacles. Maybe there were other hikers somewhere ahead, and I'd heard a fragment of their conversation distorted by distance and stone. Maybe someone had called out a name that sounded like mine, and my anxious brain had filled in the rest. But I'd never heard an echo that perfect before, that intimate. My hands were shaking slightly as I pulled my phone from my pants pocket and moved it to my chest pocket, zipping it in securely. No service out here anyway, but I wanted it close, accessible. A talisman against the sudden vulnerability I felt. I told myself I'd push on for another 15 minutes, just long enough to find a good spot for photos, and then I'd turn around. No reason to panic. No reason to let some acoustic trick ruin a beautiful hike. But I needed a marker. Some way to test whether my paranoia was justified. At the next sandbar, beside a thick cottonwood root that broke through the bank like a gnarled fist, I used the metal tip of my trekking pole to scrape a straight line in the damp sand, 6 inches long, perfectly straight, deliberate, a control mark. If it looked the same on my way back out, I'd know I was just being foolish. If it didn't, well, I'd deal with that then. I pushed on to the 9th crossing, then the 10th. At a slow, mirror-calm pool backed by a sheer red wall, I stopped and pulled out my camera. The reflection was perfect. Limestone cliffs and golden cottonwoods doubled in the still water. I set up my tripod with mechanical precision, trying to focus on the familiar ritual of photography. F-stop, shutter speed, composition, normal things. But my fingers were stiff with cold and I kept looking over my shoulder. After 3 shots that I knew wouldn't be usable, my heart rate was too elevated, my hands too unsteady. I packed up my gear and started back. The sun had moved enough that the patches of direct light had shifted, and the shadows felt deeper, heavier. As I approached the 11th crossing, I heard voices behind me, distant but clear. 2 people talking, their words too muffled to make out but their tone casual, relaxed. Other hikers. Normal people on a normal hike. The sound of them eased the tension in my shoulders slightly. Then the voices stopped. Not faded with distance. Just stopped. Mid-sentence, as if someone had pressed a mute button. The silence that followed felt wrong, too complete. At the 11th crossing, I saw it, right in the center of my own boot print, the heel impression still crisp and clear where I'd stepped in the soft sand. Someone had placed 3 smooth creek stones. They were stacked one atop the other, still wet, balanced carefully on a single red cottonwood leaf. I stopped so abruptly I nearly lost my footing. I'd walked through this exact spot 60 seconds earlier, maybe 90. I'd been watching my footing, counting crossings aloud to keep my pace steady, and this stack hadn't been here. I would have noticed. I would have stepped on it. There were no other footprints near it. No scuffs in the sand. No disturbances. Just my own track. And these 3 stones, and the leaf beneath them still bright with water. My mouth went dry. I turned in a slow circle, scanning every shadow, every undercut bank, every gap in the brush. The canyon walls rose on either side, offering 1,000 hiding places. The creek rushed past, its sound suddenly too loud, masking any other noise that might have warned me I wasn't alone. That's when I saw the forearms. They emerged from beneath a massive fallen cottonwood that bridged the creek about 30 feet downstream. Bare skin, pale in the dim light, stretched over long bones. The hands pressed flat against the wet sand, fingers splayed wide as if testing the ground's firmness, or preparing to push off. The position was wrong. All wrong. The angle suggested someone crouched on all fours beneath the log, but no one should be able to fit in that space. It was too low, too narrow, and the arms were too long, the joints bending at angles that made my stomach clench with instinctive wrongness. I couldn't see ahead, just the arms and hands, motionless in the shadow. Then the thing, my brain insisted, no longer person, let out a soft sound. Not quite a whistle, not quite a wheeze. A wet, breathy noise that might have been words if you were already expecting words. If I'd been primed to hear language, I might have interpreted it as, "Come back," spoken in a voice that had forgotten how mouths work. I didn't realize I was backing away until I felt the cold bite of water around my calves. I'd stepped into the creek without looking, without turning around. Some survival instinct had taken over, the kind that knows not to turn your back on predators. I eased myself up the opposite bank, feeling behind me with my trekking pole for stable ground, never taking my eyes off that shadowed space beneath the log. The arms didn't move. The hands remained flat and spread. But I knew with a certainty that bypassed all logic that it was watching me. 10, I said aloud, my voice cracking. 9, 8. I was counting backward now, counting crossings in reverse, using the numbers like a prayer to keep my mind from fracturing. The poles clicked against stone as I moved, and I focused on that sound, on the rhythm of it, on anything but the image of those 2 long arms burned into my vision. At the 10th crossing, the voice came again. My name, my brother's voice. But this time it was off. Just a half beat too slow, like someone reciting a phrase they'd memorized phonetically without understanding the meaning. The rhythm was close but not quite right, and that tiny wrongness was worse than if it had been completely alien. 9, I said louder, and kept walking. 8, 7. Don't run. Running triggers chase instincts. I'd read that somewhere, about predators, about attacks. Keep moving but don't run. Stay calm. Stay focused. At crossing 8, I looked for my marker. The straight line I'd drawn with my trekking pole was still there, but it had been altered. 2 parallel grooves, each about as wide as a finger, had been dragged across it in a wide arc. The furrows were fresh. The sand at their edges still crumbled and loose. They pointed toward me, converging like the lines in a perspective drawing, all pointing back to where I'd been standing when I made the original mark. Someone had been here, close enough to touch what I'd touched, close enough to crouch down and deliberately deface my mark while I was just around the bend, close enough to have reached out and grabbed my ankle while I drew that line, if it had wanted to. The coyote started up somewhere on the rim above me, that high, wavering chorus that sounds like laughter if you're in the right mood and screaming if you're not. I wasn't in the right mood. The sound rose and fell, overlapping voices creating that chaotic harmony that makes it impossible to count individual animals. Then a sharp crack echoed off the canyon wall, something between a gunshot and a branch breaking, and the coyotes went silent. Not gradually. Not a slow fade as they lost interest or moved away. They just stopped. All at once. as if something had silenced them. I kept moving, my eyes locked on the trail ahead, trying to remember the exact sequence of crossings. 7, 6, 5. Each number brought me closer to the footbridge, closer to the parking lot, closer to people and cars and the illusion of safety. At one of the shallow bends, I'd lost track of which number. I glanced down at my own boot print in a patch of damp sand. Another stack. 3 stones, pressed into my heel print this time, with a leaf folded underneath the smallest rock. It hadn't been there when I passed this spot before. I would have seen it. I would have stepped on it. The realization hit me like cold water. Whatever was out here wasn't just following me. It was tracking me. Using my own footprints as markers. The same way I was using crossings and landmarks. It was learning my methods, adapting to my behavior. And it was faster than me. I stepped off the trail and into the middle of the creek. The water immediately pushed at my knees, trying to unbalance me, and the cold was shocking even through my hiking pants. Within seconds, my socks were soaked, my toes going numb. I knew this was a good way to catch a cramp, knew that hypothermia could set in faster than most people realized. But the water would wash away my tracks. It would erase the breadcrumb trail I'd been leaving. I broke a thin twig from a low-hanging cottonwood branch and tucked it behind my ear. A timer. When it drooped and fell from my body heat warming it, I'd know I'd been in the water too long. I'd force myself to think about getting to safety rather than just away from what was behind me. The next voice stopped me mid-step. Sweetheart. My mother's voice, not shouted but projected the same tone she uses at my nephew's baseball games when she wants him to hear her over the crowd. But there was an edge to it I couldn't place. A strain, a quality that suggested vocal cords being used in a way they weren't designed for. Sweetheart, it came again, from ahead of me this time. Then, overlapping the echo from behind me. Help me. 2 voices, 2 directions. The same voice, but impossible because my mother was 1,000 miles away, safe in her house, probably cooking dinner or watching the news. She wasn't here. She couldn't be here. And she would never call me sweetheart. That detail, small, specific, wrong, cut through the fear fog in my brain like a knife. My mother doesn't use endearments like that. She uses my name, or honey occasionally, but never sweetheart. It's not her word, not her voice pattern. Whatever was out here was good at imitation, but it wasn't perfect. It had made a mistake. I kept moving through the water, my boots slipping on algae slick stones, my thighs burning with the effort of pushing against the current. I started talking to myself, not in my head but out loud, anchoring myself to my own voice. Footbridge, paved path, gate, highway, parking lot, car. I said the names of the places between here and safety. A litany of normal things. Footbridge, paved path, gate, highway. My voice was shaking, but it was mine. Real, human. Around a broad bend, the canyon opened slightly into a stretch of shallow water and exposed gravel. Sunset light touched the upper rim for the first time in hours, turning the rock faces blood orange. And that's where I saw it clearly for the first time. It moved across the stones upstream from me on its hands and knees, but wrong. Elbows and knees hitting the ground in turns instead of in pairs. Right elbow, left knee, left elbow, right knee. The gait of something that had studied human movement but hadn't quite mastered the pattern. The shoulders and hips rose and dropped with each placement, creating a rolling, undulating motion that made my vision swim. It didn't splash. Despite moving through several inches of water, it made no sound beyond the soft click of joints bending, of bone moving against bone. The head turned as it moved, swiveling to track me while the body continued forward. The neck rotated too far, 30 degrees past what human anatomy allows. The face stayed in shadow, but I could see the general shape of it. Almost right, almost human, but flattened somehow, as if all the proportions had been translated through a corrupted algorithm. I realized something then, standing hip-deep in frigid water with my muscles beginning to seize. It only made sound when I couldn't see it directly. Every time it had called my name, every time it had mimicked my family's voices, I'd been looking away, either around a bend or focused on my footing, or scanning the brush on the opposite bank. But now, with my eyes locked directly on it, it moved in perfect silence. It was a trap. The voices were designed to make me look away, to make me turn my head, to break visual contact so it could close the distance while I searched for the source of the sound. I forced myself to keep watching it. Even as I continued downstream, my peripheral vision caught the bright gap in the canyon where West Fork met Oak Creek. The footbridge wasn't far past that junction, maybe a quarter mile, 300 yards, 5 minutes at a normal pace. But my legs were cramping now, the muscles in my thighs seizing from the cold and the effort. The twig fell from my ear, drifting away on the current. I'd been in the water too long. The thing kept pace with me, 40 feet away, moving with that horrible rolling gait. Then it rose slightly, the back arching, the head lifting, and I saw the face catch a sliver of fading light. I won't describe it in detail, I can't. My brain refused to process what I was seeing, the same way it refuses to accept optical illusions even when you know the trick. The proportions weren't just wrong, they were conditional. They seemed to change depending on the angle of light, or perhaps on how hard I tried to focus on specific features, eyes where they should be, but too far apart, or too close together. Both, somehow. Neither. What I can tell you is that I understood, in that moment, that I wasn't looking at something that had once been human. This wasn't a person experiencing a medical emergency or a mental health crisis. This wasn't someone hurt or lost or confused. This was something else. Something that wore the shape of human as a costume, a lure, a trap. I ran. The cramping in my legs became irrelevant. The cold became irrelevant. All that mattered was the strip of brighter sky ahead, the promise of the junction, the hope of the footbridge. My boots splashed through the shallow water at the confluence, and I angled toward the bank, scrambling up onto the dirt trail. Behind me, I couldn't stop myself from looking. The shape had risen to a hunched bipedal stance, shoulders forward, head down, arms hanging loose. It swayed slightly, as if testing balance. Then it lowered again, folding in on itself. And something about that deliberate change of posture was worse than anything that had come before. It was considering, deciding, choosing its next move. I ran harder. The paved path appeared, a ribbon of blessed civilization cutting through the wilderness. My boots hit the pavement with sharp cracks that echoed off the walls. The day-use restroom, the interpretive signs, the small gate that marked the boundary between wilderness and development. Through the cottonwoods, I could see the highway, that beautiful gray strip of asphalt, with its yellow lines and traffic signs and the promise of other human beings who lived in a world where things like this didn't happen. I came out onto the shoulder waving my arms like a drowning person, like someone whose house was on fire. Like someone who had just realized that all the safety they'd taken for granted was an illusion. A silver SUV was passing northbound. The driver, a man in his 50s with reading glasses pushed up on his head, locked eyes with me and slammed on his brakes. The vehicle skidded slightly, tires chirping on the pavement. I was already at the back door before he'd fully stopped, pulling at the handle, yanking it open. I didn't have a story prepared. I didn't have anything except the truth, stripped of any pretense of calm. "Someone's following me," I gasped, pointing back toward the trailhead. "Someone's back there. Please." The woman in the passenger seat, his wife, I assumed, turned to look past me, her face going pale. She grabbed her husband's arm hard enough that I could see her knuckles go white even from outside the vehicle. "Get in," the man said, his voice tight. "Get in now." I threw myself into the back seat, not bothering with the seatbelt, twisting around to watch the mouth of the trail. The headlights were on now, automatic sensors triggering in the gathering dusk, and their beams illuminated the last 50 feet of the paved path. At the very edge of the light, where gravel met asphalt shoulder, something stood. Not crouched, not hunched, standing, with a posture that suggested it wanted to be seen, wanted us to see it. A silhouette against the darkening canyon mouth, perfectly still. You know when someone doesn't want their face in light. It's not something you can quantify or explain, but you know it, you feel it. The way a person will angle their head, turn their shoulders, position themselves to keep their features in shadow, even when moving toward illumination. This thing did that, deliberately. "Oh my God," the man whispered. "Drive," his wife said. "Drive now." The SUV jerked forward, tires spitting gravel, and we accelerated up 89A. I kept my face pressed to the rear window, watching the trailhead recede. The figure didn't follow us onto the pavement. It didn't move at all. It just stood there, at the threshold between one world and another, and watched us leave. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped my phone twice before I could unlock it. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind a trembling weakness that made my joints feel loose, disconnected. "Do you need a hospital?" the woman asked, turning in her seat to look at me. Her face was kind, concerned, but there was fear in her eyes too. She'd seen what I'd seen. "No, I'm okay. Just, can you take me back to the parking lot? My car's there. I didn't know what I needed, to get away, to document this, to prove to myself it had happened." "We should call the police," the man said. "Yes," I managed. "Yes, okay." I dialed 911 with trembling fingers. When the dispatcher answered, I forced myself to speak calmly, to stick to facts. "I'm calling to report I was followed on the West Fork Trail, off 89A Call of the Canyon trailhead. Someone was following me. They were leaving markers on my footprints. They called my name. I paused, aware of how insane this would sound. "I need to report this." The dispatcher's voice was professional, practiced. She took my location, my name, a brief description of events. I didn't try to explain the details. I didn't mention the way it moved, or the voices, or the face that wasn't a face. I just said, followed, markers, voices, I recognized. Facts. Concrete things. A deputy from the Coconino County Sheriff's Office met us in the day-use parking lot 20 minutes later. His cruiser's lights painted the cottonwoods red and blue. He took my statement standing beside his vehicle, writing in a notebook with careful block letters. "And you're certain you were alone on the trail?" he asked. "I was alone when I started. But something," I gestured helplessly toward the canyon mouth. "Something was out there." He nodded, his expression neutral. "Cops are good at that, at not showing whether they believe you or think you're crazy. I'll do a pass with my lights on before you leave. Make sure nothing's obviously wrong." "Thank you." He drove slowly through the parking area, his spotlight sweeping across the trees, the restrooms, the information kiosk. When he finished, he pulled up beside me and rolled down his window. "Lot's clear, but I'd recommend you don't hike alone out here anymore, especially near dusk. We get bears sometimes, mountain lions. Wildlife can behave unpredictably." Wildlife. He was giving me an out, a rational explanation I could accept if I wanted to. I almost took it. "Okay," I said, "thank you." The couple had waited with me the entire time. Before they left, the woman squeezed my hand. "Be safe," she said, "and God bless you." I sat in my car for a long time after they drove away, just sitting in the driver's seat with the doors locked and the engine running. The heater blasted warm air that slowly thawed my numb feet. The deputy had told me to come back the next day in daylight to walk him to my car, to check for any damage or evidence of tampering. But the next afternoon, when I met him there, we found something I hadn't expected. On my rear quarter panel, the driver's side facing the trail, there were smears in dried red sediment, handprints dragged through mud or clay, left to dry in the sun. The deputy crouched beside them, studying the patterns. "How tall are you?" he asked. 5'7". He frowned. "These are low, real low, like someone was crouched down, or..." He rubbed one with his thumb, and the dried sediment stained his skin rust red. "Or on their hands and knees." He took photos for his report, documented the smears, measured their height from the ground, asked if I'd parked anywhere near mud or clay that might have transferred these marks. I hadn't. "I'll add it to the report," he said finally. "Classified as harassment, suspicious person. If you have any other incidents, call it in immediately." I drove back to my cabin in a daze. That night I couldn't sleep, though I didn't use those words. I lay awake, listening to every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the windows. The porch light stayed on. I kept my phone on the nightstand, volume turned up, the emergency dial screen already open. It wasn't until the next morning, packing my things to check out a day early, that I thought to check my phone's apps. The voice memo app had recorded 5 minutes and 43 seconds of audio. I didn't remember starting a recording. I must have activated it accidentally when I shoved the phone into my chest pocket, fumbling with numb fingers. I almost deleted it without listening. Almost. Most of the audio was exactly what you'd expect. Running water. My jacket rustling with each gasping breath. The sharp scrape of my boots on stone. But at the 2-minute mark, clear as day, a voice called out my mother's name. Not my voice. I wasn't calling for her. This was someone else's voice. Hoarse, strained, unpracticed, calling out the name of the woman who'd raised me. Trying to summon her, perhaps. Or trying to summon me by using her as bait. At 4 minutes and 12 seconds, it happened again. Slightly different pronunciation this time. As if the speaker was testing variations, learning. I sent my mother a text. "Where were you yesterday afternoon around 3 p.m.? Her response came quickly. "At home. Why? Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine. Just checking. Love you." I didn't send her the audio. I don't know if I ever will. I emailed the file to myself and saved a copy to 3 different cloud services. I screenshotted the file properties, the timestamp, the length, the waveform visualization, and saved the deputy's incident number. The ranger who eventually returned my call about my follow-up questions logged it formally. Harassment, suspicious person. That's fair. That's factual. I don't have names or faces. I don't have explanations that make sense. A coworker of mine later, someone whose grandmother was from a Navajo community near Flagstaff, listened to my story one evening after work. She didn't interrupt. Didn't ask questions. When I finished, she said one word, then stood up and left the break room. I didn't ask her to explain. These stories aren't mine to tell. I stopped recounting the funny version of this story at parties. The one where people wait for a punchline or a jump scare. There isn't one. There's just what happened, and the choices I made afterward. I refuse to hike West Fork near dusk now. If I go back and I haven't decided if I will, I'll go at noon with someone I trust, with a headlamp in my pocket and extra layers because the temperature drops fast in that canyon, no matter what the forecast says. For a month after I got home, I left my porch light on every night. I answered calls from family members on speakerphone, checking their tone, their word choices, their rhythm, making sure it was really them. I didn't jump at my phone when it rang, but I stopped answering it immediately. I let it ring twice, 3 times, while I prepared myself for the possibility that the voice on the other end might be one I recognized but shouldn't trust. Nothing else called my name from my yard. No stones appeared on my porch steps. No muddy handprints dried on my car doors. If you're looking for the part where it follows me home, where this becomes an ongoing haunting, that chapter isn't here. Whatever was in that canyon stayed in that canyon. It had its territory, its hunting ground, and I'm not part of it anymore. If you want proof, I can offer what I have: the sheriff's incident number, the timestamp on the voice memo, GPS coordinates for the exact crossing where I found the stone stacks when I went back in daylight with the deputy. Photos of handprints on my car panel, still visible in the images even though I scrubbed them away with solvent that same afternoon. The rest is the part I'm asking you to believe. Or not. If you go to West Fork, and people will. Because it's beautiful. Because photos don't capture the menace that waits there. Turn around earlier than you think you should. Count your crossings. Pay attention to your own markers. Stay out of the sand if something starts marking your prints. Don't leave traces for it to follow, to study, to learn from. And if the canyon gets personal, if someone you love starts calling you from 2 directions at once with a voice that's almost right but not quite, don't answer. Don't try to find them. Don't try to help. Walk the creek until you see the footbridge. Keep your eyes on the water and the way out. Move steadily, not frantically. Don't run until you're sure you can make it. I did all of this, and nothing followed me onto the highway. That's the only reason I'm alive, to write this down, to post it as a warning, to hope that someone else will read it and choose differently. That's the only reason I'm here at all. You've been a park ranger at Howling Pines National Forest for 8 years now, and you thought you'd seen everything these Michigan woods could throw at you. Lost hikers, illegal campers, the occasional bear encounter, drunk teenagers thinking they're invincible, all part of the job. But nothing prepared you for the summer of 2024, when people started disappearing without a trace. The first was Carter Williams, a 23-year-old from Grand Rapids, who'd come up for a solo camping trip in June. His campsite at Cedar Lake was found perfectly intact. Tent still staked, food still hanging in the bear canister, boots neatly placed outside the tent flap. The only signs of disturbance were the massive paw prints circling the site, too large for any known animal in Michigan. Then Cash Morrison vanished in July. The 35-year-old father of two had been fly fishing along Whisper Creek when his wife Emily called 911. She'd heard him screaming from their cabin a quarter-mile away. Not the kind of scream you make when you snag your line or slip on wet rocks. This was pure terror, she told you during the interview, her hands shaking as she poured coffee neither of you would drink. It went on for maybe 30 seconds, Emily said, staring out the cabin window toward the creek. Then nothing. Just silence. You'd organized the search parties yourself, combing every inch of the forest for 3 days. All you found was Cash's fishing rod snapped in half, and his tackle box scattered like something had batted it around with incredible force. The tracks you found nearby defied explanation, canine in shape but easily twice the size of the largest wolf track you'd ever seen, with claw marks that gouged deep into the earth. By August, the disappearances were making national news. Remy Patterson, a marine biology student from Michigan State, had been collecting water samples for her thesis when she simply vanished. Her research equipment was found floating in Whisper Creek, along with her field notebook, every page torn to shreds. The media dubbed it the Howling Pines Mystery, sending reporters and amateur investigators flooding into your forest. You spent more time managing crowds than actually investigating, watching helplessly as evidence got trampled and contaminated. The pressure from above was mounting too. State officials wanted answers, families wanted closure, and you had nothing to give them but oversized paw prints and theories that sounded insane even to yourself. That's when you started staying late at the ranger station, poring over incident reports from decades past. What you found in the dusty filing cabinets made your blood run cold. Missing persons cases stretching back to the 1940s, all following the same pattern. Campers, hikers, fishermen, all vanishing without a trace, leaving behind only signs of struggle and those impossible tracks. The old-timers in the area had a name for what took them: Dogman. Most of the reports dismissed it as local folklore, the kind of legend that grows around any dense forest. But the consistency was disturbing. Descriptions from survivors and witnesses going back generations all painted the same picture: a massive creature, part man and part wolf, standing upright on powerful hind legs, 7 feet tall or more, covered in dark fur with glowing yellow eyes and fangs that could crush bone. You'd always prided yourself on being rational, scientific. You believed in facts, evidence, logical explanations. But as September arrived and the disappearances continued, rationality was becoming a luxury you couldn't afford. Zane Cooper, an experienced woodsman and hunting guide, had vanished just 2 days ago. His hunting party found his rifle torn in half, the metal barrel twisted like a pretzel. Tonight, you're alone in the station, spreading out topographical maps and marking every disappearance with red pins. The pattern is unmistakable. They're all clustered around the deepest, most remote sections of the forest, areas where the old-growth pines block out most of the sunlight and create a perpetual twilight beneath their branches. The sound from outside makes you look up from the maps. It's barely audible through the station's thick walls, but unmistakably organic. Not the bark of a coyote or the howl of a wolf. Something else entirely. Something that makes your skin crawl and your hand instinctively reach for the service weapon on your belt. The sound comes again, closer this time. A low rumbling growl that seems to vibrate through the very foundation of the building. You move to the window, peering out into the darkness beyond the station's floodlights. The forest looks innocent enough, just shadows and moonlight painting everything in shades of gray. But you know better now. You know what's out there in those shadows, hunting. Your radio crackles to life, making you jump. It's Omar Rodriguez, your colleague working the night shift at the north entrance.
Hey, you still at the station?
Omar's voice carries an edge of concern. I'm getting some weird calls from campers at Devil's Backbone Campground. They're reporting strange noises, something moving around the perimeter of the camp. You grab the radio. Your mouth suddenly dry. Devil's Backbone is one of the remotest campgrounds in the park, surrounded by miles of dense forest. If the creature is there now, those campers are sitting ducks. How many people are we talking about, you ask, already reaching for your gear? Maybe 15, 20 people total, mostly families with kids. Omar pauses. Should I call the state police? You consider it. The state police have been cooperative, but they're stretched thin across multiple counties, and their response time to Devil's Backbone would be at least an hour. Those families don't have an hour if your worst fears are correct. Negative, you say, clipping the radio to your belt. I'm heading out there now. Keep monitoring the radio and call for backup if you don't hear from me within 2 hours. Roger that. Be careful out there. You load your truck with everything you might need. Flares, emergency medical supplies, your heavy-duty flashlight, and extra ammunition for your sidearm. As you drive through the winding forest roads toward Devil's Backbone, you can't shake the feeling that you're driving toward a confrontation that's been years in the making. The headlights of your truck pierce the darkness ahead, but the forest seems to press in from all sides, creating a tunnel of shadows that swallows your light. Every now and then, you catch a glimpse of movement in your peripheral vision, something large and dark keeping pace with your vehicle through the trees. By the time you reach Devil's Backbone, you're gripping the steering wheel so tightly your knuckles have gone white. The campground appears peaceful at first glance. Several tents are scattered around the area, with a few RVs parked near the main loop. Campfires are still burning, casting dancing shadows on the surrounding trees. But something's wrong. It's too quiet. No voices. No sounds of activity that you'd expect from a campground full of families. Even the insects have fallen silent, as if the entire forest is holding its breath. You park near the campground entrance and step out of your truck, your hand resting on your weapon. The smell hits you immediately. Something wild and predatory, like wet dog mixed with something fouler, something that doesn't belong in these woods. A child's scream pierces the silence, high and terrified, coming from somewhere deeper in the campground. Then another scream and another, as panic spreads through the camp like wildfire. You break into a run, your flashlight beam dancing wildly as you sprint toward the sounds of terror. Whatever's happening, you're about to come face to face with the thing that's been haunting Howling Pines for decades. The thing they call Dogman. The screaming leads you to the far end of the campground, where the forest presses closest to the campsites. Your flashlight beam sweeps across overturned picnic tables and scattered camping gear as you run, the chaos telling a story of people fleeing in blind panic. You find them huddled together near the restroom building. Maybe a dozen campers, adults clutching children, everyone wild-eyed with terror. Emerson Blake, a man in his 40s wearing a Michigan State t-shirt, spots your ranger uniform and rushes toward you. "Thank God you're here," he gasps, pointing toward a cluster of tents that have been shredded to ribbons. "That thing took Knox and his family. Just grabbed them and dragged them into the woods. We tried to stop it, but..." He trails off, staring at your service weapon. Even in the darkness you can see the hopelessness in his eyes. Whatever he saw out there, a pistol seems laughably inadequate. "How long ago," you ask, helping a crying woman to her feet. Her name tag reads Rory, probably a teacher, considering the Jefferson Elementary logo on her jacket. "Maybe 10 minutes, Emerson says. "We called 911, but they said it would be at least an hour before anyone could get here." You nod, doing quick mental calculations. Knox and his family could still be alive, but not for long if the pattern holds. The thing you're hunting doesn't keep prisoners. It kills quickly and efficiently, then drags the bodies away to wherever it lairs. "I need everyone to get in their vehicles right now," you say, raising your voice to address the entire group. "Drive to the ranger station and wait there. Don't stop for anything. Don't get out of your cars until you reach the main road." "What about Knox?" asks Marco Gutierrez, a young man with blood on his t-shirt, probably from trying to help during the attack. "We can't just leave them." "I'm going after them," you say, checking your gear one more time. "But I need you people safe first. That thing might come back." As the survivors pack into their vehicles, you study the scene of the attack more carefully. Knox's campsite looks like it was hit by a tornado. The family tent is completely destroyed, support poles snapped like toothpicks. Deep gouges in the earth show where massive claws found purchase as something incredibly strong dragged its prey toward the tree line. The tracks are the clearest you've seen yet. Definitely canine, but impossibly large. Each paw print is nearly a foot long, with claw marks extending several inches beyond the pads. The stride length suggests something moving on two legs, covering ground with the efficiency of a predator born to hunt. You follow the trail into the forest, your flashlight creating a narrow cone of visibility in the oppressive darkness. The tracks lead deeper into the wilderness, toward the heart of howling pines where the trees grow so thick that daylight barely penetrates even at noon. Behind you, you hear car engines starting as the survivors follow your instructions. At least they'll be safe. Now you just have to pray you're not too late for Knox and his family. The forest grows denser as you follow the trail, branches catching at your uniform and forcing you to duck under low-hanging limbs. The creature's path is easy to follow. Broken branches, disturbed undergrowth, and occasional drops of blood that glisten darkly in your flashlight beam. After about half a mile, you hear something that makes your blood freeze. A human voice, weak but unmistakably alive, calling for help somewhere ahead of you. You quicken your pace, pushing through a thick stand of pine saplings, and emerge into a small clearing. What you see there will haunt your dreams for the rest of your life. Knox Davidson, a man in his 30s, is tied to a massive oak tree with what looks like strips of bark. His face is bloody, one eye swollen shut, but he's conscious and alert. 20 feet away, his wife Preston and their twin daughters, who can't be more than 8 years old, are bound to another tree. They're alive, but they're bait. You realize this just as something massive crashes through the undergrowth behind you. You spin around, drawing your weapon, and come face to face with the thing that's been terrorizing Howling Pines for decades. The Dogman stands nearly 8 feet tall, its muscular frame covered in coarse dark fur that seems to absorb your flashlight beam. Its head is distinctly canine, elongated snout filled with teeth like railroad spikes, ears that twitch at every sound, but its eyes are disturbingly human, showing an intelligence that no animal should possess. It moves on its hind legs with surprising grace for something so large, powerful arms ending in clawed hands that could tear a man in half. When it sees you, it tilts its head slightly, studying you with those horrible knowing eyes. "Let them go," you say, raising your weapon. Your voice sounds steadier than you feel. "This is between you and me now." The creature's lips pull back in what might be a grin, revealing rows of fangs designed for rending flesh from bone. It makes a sound, not quite a howl, not quite a laugh, but something that combines the worst aspects of both. Then it moves. You've never seen anything so large move so fast. 1 second it's 20 feet away, the next it's on you, claws raking across your chest and sending you flying backward into a tree. Your weapon goes spinning into the darkness as you hit the oak hard enough to knock the wind from your lungs. The Dogman doesn't follow up immediately. Instead, it retrieves your pistol with surprising delicacy, examining the weapon with something approaching curiosity before crushing it in one massive hand. The metal screams as it deforms, pieces dropping to the forest floor like broken toys. "It's playing with us." Knox gasps from his position tied to the tree. "It could have killed us already, but it's enjoying this." You struggle to your feet, tasting blood. The claw marks across your chest are painful but not deep. The creature held back, you realize. It wants you alive, at least for now. The Dogman circles the clearing, never taking its eyes off you. Each footstep shakes the ground slightly, and you can hear its breathing. Deep, controlled, patient. It's savoring this moment, the terror in its prey's eyes. That's when you remember the flares in your gear belt. Your hand moves slowly toward the emergency kit, hoping the creature won't notice the movement. But those intelligent eyes miss nothing. The Dogman's head tilts again, and you see something like amusement in its expression. It wants to see what you'll do. You grab the flare and strike it against the ignition strip. Brilliant red light floods the clearing, and for just a moment the Dogman recoils, raising one clawed hand to shield its sensitive eyes. That moment of distraction is all you need. You hurl the burning flare directly at the creature's face, then immediately light a second one. The Dogman roars, a sound that seems to shake the very trees, and stumbles backward, pawing at its eyes. "Knox," you shout, running toward the bound family with your survival knife drawn. "Get ready to move." You slice through Knox's bonds first, then help him free his family while the Dogman thrashes in the red-lit clearing, temporarily blinded but already recovering. Knox scoops up one daughter while Preston grabs the other, and you all run for the tree line. But you know running won't be enough. The dogman knows these woods better than you ever will, and once its vision clears, it will hunt you down with methodical efficiency. You need a plan, and you need it fast. As your small group crashes through the underbrush, you think about everything you know about the creature. It's incredibly strong and fast, but the flare affected it. Maybe it has other weaknesses you can exploit. Maybe there's still a way to survive this nightmare. Behind you, the roaring stops, and you know the hunt is about to begin in earnest. Your group stumbles through the dark forest, trying to put distance between yourselves and the creature while making as little noise as possible. Knox carries 8-year-old Lennon, while Preston struggles with her twin sister Archer. Both girls are in shock, too terrified to cry, which might be the only thing keeping you alive right now. You lead them toward what you hope is safety, an old fire lookout tower about 2 miles north of the clearing. Built in the 1960s and abandoned years ago, it's one of the few structures in this part of the forest that might offer some protection. If you can reach it, you might be able to radio for help or at least have the high ground advantage. The forest is eerily quiet around you. No night sounds, no insects, nothing but the soft whisper of your footsteps on the pine needle carpet. Even the wind has died down, as if nature itself is holding its breath. "Is it following us?" Preston whispers, shifting Archer's weight in her arms. You pause, listening carefully. No sounds of pursuit, no breaking branches or heavy footfalls. But that doesn't mean anything. The dogman could be stalking you silently, staying just beyond your hearing while it chooses the perfect moment to strike. "Keep moving," you say quietly. "We're almost there." The fire tower looms out of the darkness like a skeletal finger pointing at the stars. 50 feet of steel framework topped by a small observation cabin. It's seen better days but looks structurally sound. More importantly, there's only one way up, a narrow ladder that would force any pursuer to climb in the open. You test the ladder's stability, then gesture for Knox to start climbing with Lennon. "Go quickly but don't make noise," you whisper. "I'll come up last." As the family makes their way up the tower, you keep watch on the surrounding forest. Your flashlight is dimmed to preserve battery life, creating just enough illumination to see immediate threats. The red flare burned out long ago, leaving you in the blue-black darkness of a moonless night. That's when you see them. 2 golden points of light moving through the trees about 100 yards away. The dogman's eyes reflecting what little starlight filters through the canopy. It's found your trail and is closing in, but slowly, deliberately, like it knows exactly where you're going. You scramble up the ladder, taking the rungs 2 at a time. Behind you, you can hear heavy footsteps now, no longer bothering with stealth. The creature knows you're trapped. The observation cabin is cramped but solid, with thick wooden walls and windows on all sides. Knox has barricaded the door with an old desk while Preston comforts the girls in one corner. You immediately go for the radio equipment, hoping against hope that some of it still works. Most of the gear is ancient and corroded, but you manage to coax life from an old emergency radio. Static fills the air, then clears to reveal Omar's voice coming through weakly. "Base to Ranger 7. Do you copy?" You grab the microphone. "Omar, this is an emergency. I'm at the old fire tower with 4 civilians. We're under attack by something in the woods. I need immediate backup. Every unit you can spare." "Roger that." State police are already en route to Devil's Backbone. "What's your exact situation?" Before you can answer, the tower shakes. Not violently, but enough to rattle the windows and make everyone in the cabin go quiet. Something very large and very strong has just struck the base of the tower. You move to the window and look down. In the darkness below, you can barely make out a massive shape circling the tower's base. As you watch, it rears up on its hind legs and places its front paws against the steel framework. The entire structure groans under the pressure. "It's trying to bring down the tower," you say into the radio. "I don't think this thing will hold much longer." Another impact, stronger this time. Books fall from shelves, and one of the windows develops a spiderweb of cracks. The dogman is systematically attacking the tower's support struts, and from the sound of screaming metal, it's succeeding. Knox joins you at the window, his face pale in the flashlight's glow. "What does it want with us? Why doesn't it just leave?" That's when you notice something that changes everything. In your flashlight beam, you can see deep gouges in the cabin's wooden walls, claw marks that match the ones you've been finding at attack sites. Old marks, weathered by years of exposure. This isn't random, you realize, running your fingers along the scratches. This tower, it's been here before, maybe many times. You search the cabin more thoroughly, pushing aside decades of accumulated debris. In a corner beneath some moldy canvas, you find a metal strongbox that's been hidden away. The lock is corroded but still functional, and you manage to force it open with your survival knife. Inside are dozens of photographs, newspaper clippings, and handwritten reports dating back to the 1960s, all documenting encounters with the same creature that's currently trying to kill you. One photograph stops you cold. It shows a group of hunters from 1967, posing with their rifles next to what's obviously the Dogman's body. The creature is lying on its side, clearly dead, with multiple bullet wounds visible in its torso. But if they killed it in 1967, what's stalking you now? You flip through more photos, finding similar shots from different decades. The Dogman's body with different groups of hunters, different wounds, different backgrounds. My God, you whisper, understanding flooding through you like ice water. They keep killing it, but it keeps coming back. The tower shakes again, more violently this time. Through the fractured window, you can hear the creature below making sounds you've never heard before. Not growls or roars, but something almost like speech. Guttural, inhuman, but with a rhythm and cadence that suggests language. Preston has noticed the photographs and is looking through them with growing horror. Look at this, she says, holding up a yellowed newspaper clipping. From the Traverse City Record Eagle, 1952. Local woodsman claims to have killed Devil Dog. And this one from 1963. Monster of Howling Pines finally destroyed. The pattern is clear. Every few years, someone claims to have killed the Dogman. There are always photographs, always witnesses, always relief in the community. But the disappearances never stop for long. After a few months or a year of peace, people start vanishing again. A new photograph catches your attention. This one much more recent. Probably from the 1990s based on the clothing styles. It shows a young park ranger, probably not much older than you, standing over the Dogman's corpse. The ranger's name tag is just visible, C. Morrison. Morrison. That name is familiar, but you can't place it immediately. Then you remember Cash Morrison, the fisherman who disappeared in July. His wife Emily had mentioned that his father was a park ranger here in the 1990s. The families, you say. Pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. It's targeting families of people who killed it before. Knox looks up from the photographs. What do you mean? Every person who's disappeared this summer. I bet if we checked, we'd find their fathers or grandfathers are in these photos. The Dogman isn't just hunting randomly. It's getting revenge. The tower lurches suddenly, tilting at least 10 degrees before settling back. Metal screams in protest, and you realize you're out of time. The structure won't survive another assault like that. But now you understand what you're dealing with. This isn't just some mindless beast. It's something that remembers. Something that holds grudges across generations. Something that refuses to stay dead. And if the pattern holds, killing it again won't solve anything. It will just ensure that your own children, years from now, become its targets. The radio crackles back to life. Ranger 7. State police are 20 minutes out. Can you hold your position? You look around the tilting cabin, at the terrified family huddled in the corner, at the photographs scattered across the floor. 20 minutes might as well be 20 hours. Negative, you say into the microphone. We're abandoning this position. If anyone gets through on this frequency, tell them to look for survivors at... You pause, thinking quickly. Where can you go that might offer better protection? Then you remember something from the old files back at the station. There was one place in all of Howling Pines where no disappearances had ever occurred. One area the Dogman seemed to avoid completely.
The old Native American burial ground, 3 miles east of the tower.
Tell them to search near the burial ground on Pine Ridge, you say, and tell them to bring everything they've got. This thing isn't going to stop. You turn to Knox and Preston. We're leaving, right now. Stay close together and don't look back no matter what you hear. Outside, the Dogman has gone silent, but you know it's still there, waiting. As you prepare to lead this family into the darkness, You can only hope that the old legends about sacred ground hold some truth. Because if they don't, you're all going to die tonight. The descent from the tower is the longest 30 seconds of your life. You go first, testing each rung to make sure the creature's assault hasn't weakened the ladder's connection to the framework. Knox follows with Lennon, then Preston carrying Archer, moving as quickly as they dare in the darkness. You're halfway down when the tower shudders again. The Dogman hasn't given up its assault. It's just been waiting for you to come back within reach. You shine your flashlight toward the base of the structure and catch a glimpse of massive claws wrapped around one of the support beams. "Move faster," you whisper urgently. It knows we're coming down. Your feet hit solid ground just as another impact rocks the tower. This time, you hear the distinctive sound of metal beginning to fail. A high-pitched groan followed by sharp pops as rivets give way. The entire structure is starting to lean at a dangerous angle. Knox drops to the ground behind you, immediately reaching up to help Preston with Archer. The 8-year-old is barely conscious, exhaustion and shock taking their toll. Her sister Lennon is in better shape, but clearly terrified, clinging to her father's neck as he lifts her down. You don't wait for the family to get organized. The moment Preston's feet touch earth, you're already moving toward the tree line, away from the tower and the creature that's been using it as a toy. The forest seems even darker now, if that's possible. Your flashlight beam barely penetrates 10 feet into the undergrowth, creating more shadows than it eliminates. But you know these woods better than most, and the burial ground on Pine Ridge is burned into your memory from countless search and rescue operations over the years. 3 miles northeast, following the old deer trail that winds along Whisper Creek before climbing into the hills. If the legends are true, if sacred ground really can offer protection from things like the Dogman, then it's your only hope. Behind you, the tower finally succumbs to the creature's assault. The crash echoes through the forest like thunder, followed by a roar of triumph that makes your skin crawl. The Dogman has destroyed your refuge and knows you're on the run. "Why aren't we heading toward the road?" Preston gasps, struggling to keep up while carrying Archer. "Shouldn't we be trying to reach the police?" "It would catch us long before we reached help," you explain, pushing through a thick stand of saplings. "Our only chance is to reach someplace it won't, or can't follow." Knox shifts Lennon's weight in his arms. "The burial ground you mentioned, you really think that'll work?" "Honestly, you have no idea. The stories about the Pine Ridge burial ground being protected are mostly local folklore, passed down through generations of Native Americans and early settlers. The Ojibwe tribe that once lived in this area considered it sacred, a place where the spirits of their ancestors watched over the land. But folklore is all you have left. Everything else, weapons, backup, rational explanations, has failed against the Dogman. Sometimes the old stories are the only truth that matters. You follow Whisper Creek for nearly a mile, using the sound of running water to guide you through the darkness. The family struggles to keep pace, especially Preston, with Archer growing heavier in her arms, but you can't afford to slow down. Every minute you spend on the trail gives the Dogman more time to close the distance. The creature is following. You can feel its presence like a weight pressing against your back. Occasionally, you catch glimpses of those golden eyes reflecting your flashlight beam, staying just at the edge of visibility. It's not rushing to attack, though. It's hurting you, driving you towards some predetermined killing ground. Or maybe it knows where you're headed and finds the idea amusing. Maybe sacred ground means nothing to something that's died and returned multiple times over the decades. The trail begins to climb as you leave the creek behind, winding up into the hills where the oldest trees and howling pines grow in silent majesty. These are the giants that were here when the first Europeans arrived. Massive white pines that have weathered centuries of storms and seasons. And somewhere among them, on a hill that rises above the forest like a green island, lies the burial ground that might be your salvation. Knox is starting to struggle with Lennon's weight, and you can hear Preston breathing heavily behind you. The girls are beyond exhaustion, barely conscious as their parents carry them through the nightmare landscape. "How much further?" Knox asks, sweat streaming down his face despite the cool night air. "Maybe half a mile," you say, checking your compass by flashlight. "The trail gets steeper from here, but we're almost there." That's when you hear it, the sound you've been dreading. Heavy footsteps crashing through the underbrush, no longer bothering with stealth. The dogman has decided to end this game. Run, you say, breaking into a sprint. Don't look back, just run. The family follows as best they can. Knox and Preston stumbling over roots and rocks in the darkness while you light the way ahead. Behind you, the sounds of pursuit grow closer. Branches snapping, leaves rustling, and underneath it all, that horrible panting breath. The trail reaches its steepest section, climbing sharply toward the ridgeline. Your legs burn with the effort, and you can only imagine how the others are suffering. But the alternative is worse than exhaustion. Then, through the trees ahead, you see it, a break in the canopy where starlight filters down to illuminate a small clearing on the hilltop. The burial ground on Pine Ridge marked by a ring of standing stones that have weathered centuries of wind and rain. There, you shout, pointing toward the clearing. That's it. You reach the edge of the sacred space just as the dogman crashes out of the forest behind you. Moving with terrifying speed despite its size, it covers the distance between the trees and the stone circle in 3 massive strides, claws extended to tear you apart. But something stops it. The creature skids to a halt, just inches from the nearest standing stone, as if it's run into an invisible wall. It snarls and tests the boundary, reaching one clawed hand toward the circle, but pulls back as if burned. You don't waste time questioning why it worked. You grab Knox and Preston, pulling them and the girls into the center of the stone circle. The moment you cross the boundary, you feel it, a sense of peace and safety that seems impossible given your circumstances. The dogman circles the burial ground like a caged animal, testing the perimeter but unable to cross. Its golden eyes burn with frustrated rage, as it realizes its prey has found sanctuary. My God, Preston whispers, setting Archer down on the soft grass within the circle. It actually worked. Knox collapses beside his daughters, exhaustion finally overwhelming him. How is this possible? What is this place? You sink down onto one of the fallen stones, your body shaking from adrenaline and relief. The Ojibwe believed this was a place where the spirit world touched the physical world. They said their ancestors' spirits protected anyone who sought refuge here. The dogman has stopped pacing and is now sitting on its haunches just outside the stone circle, watching you with those disturbingly intelligent eyes. It's not going anywhere. It's willing to wait you out, knowing you can't stay here forever. So what now? Knox asks. We just wait for the police to find us? That's when you notice something else about the creature's behavior. It's not just watching you, it's looking at something specific. Following its gaze, you see that it's focused on one particular stone in the circle, a tall granite monolith covered in carved symbols. Getting closer to examine the stone, you realize the symbols aren't Ojibwe at all. They're much older, carved by people who lived in this area long before any known Native American tribes. And at the base of the stone, partially hidden by moss and age, is something that makes your blood run cold. More photographs, like the ones you found in the fire tower. But these are much older, dating back to the early 1900s. They show the same scene, groups of men standing over the dogman's corpse, but the backgrounds are different. These kills didn't happen in Howling Pines. They happened all across the Great Lakes region, in different forests, different states, going back more than a century. And in every photograph, the creature looks exactly the same. Not aged, not changed, just constant. One photograph stops you cold. It's from 1923, showing a young man in ranger gear standing over the dogman's body somewhere in the forests of northern Wisconsin. The man's face is strangely familiar, and when you read the inscription on the back, you understand why. William Morrison, first documented kill, Chequamegon National Forest. Morrison, Cash Morrison's grandfather. The bloodline goes back 3 generations, and the dogman has been hunting them for over a century. You look up at the creature watching you from beyond the stone circle. Those golden eyes hold more than animal intelligence. They hold the accumulated rage of something that has been killed dozens of times but refuses to stay dead. Something that remembers every face, every family, every injustice. And as dawn approaches on the horizon, you realize that sacred ground or not, this confrontation is far from over. The dogman isn't just a monster, it's a force of nature seeking balance. And it won't rest until the scales are even. The question is, what will it take to finally put this thing to rest? Dawn comes slowly to Pine Ridge, painting the eastern sky in shades of orange and gold. You've been awake all night, watching the Dogman maintain its vigil outside the stone circle. It hasn't moved from its position, hasn't shown any signs of fatigue or impatience. It simply waits, like death itself. Knox and Preston have managed to get a few hours of sleep, exhaustion overcoming fear. The twins, Lennon and Archer, are curled up together on a bed of pine needles, still unconscious from the trauma of the night. You envy them their escape from this waking nightmare. Your radio has been silent since the tower fell. The old emergency unit probably damaged beyond repair. But in the growing daylight, you can see a faint trail of smoke rising from the valley below. Probably the state police searching the remains of the fire tower. Help is out there, but it might as well be on the moon. The Dogman seems to sense your thoughts. It turns its massive head toward the smoke, then looks back at you with what might be amusement. It knows the authorities are coming, and it doesn't care. Whatever protection the burial ground offers, it won't last forever. There has to be a way to end this, you say, speaking as much to yourself as to the creature. You can't just keep killing people forever. To your surprise, the Dogman reacts to your voice. Its ears perk up and it tilts its head in that disturbingly human gesture. For a moment, you think you see something other than rage in those golden eyes. Something like sadness. That's when you notice the newest photographs scattered around the base of the stone monolith. These aren't old, weathered images from decades past. These are recent, probably taken within the last few weeks. They show the Dogman's latest victims, not dead but alive and apparently unharmed, standing in what looks like a cave or underground chamber. Carter Williams, the first to disappear. Cash Morrison, the fisherman. Remy Patterson, the grad student. All the people you assumed were dead, all apparently being kept somewhere. But why? You study the photographs more carefully, looking for clues about their location. The walls of the chamber are natural stone, probably limestone based on the formations visible in the background. There are symbols carved into the walls, the same ancient markings you've seen on the standing stones. Knox, you say quietly, not wanting to wake the girls. Take a look at these. Knox examines the photographs with growing excitement. They're alive? All of them? Looks that way. But I don't understand why the Dogman would keep prisoners. Every account I've read describes it as a killer, not a kidnapper. The creature outside the circle makes a sound. Not a growl or a roar, but something almost like a whine. A sound of frustration or, looking at it more carefully in the daylight, you notice things you missed in the darkness. The Dogman's fur is grizzled with patches of gray, its movements slightly stiff as if from old injuries. This isn't a young, aggressive predator. This is something ancient, tired, carrying the weight of decades. More pieces of the puzzle click into place. The photographs showing it being killed over and over again. The targeting of specific family lines. The careful preservation of victims rather than simple slaughter. It's not revenge, you realize suddenly. It's recruitment. Knox looks at you like you've lost your mind. What are you talking about? Think about it. Every person who's disappeared has a connection to someone who killed the Dogman in the past. It's not taking them to hurt them, it's taking them to replace them. To build some kind of... The Dogman's reaction confirms your theory. It nods slowly, an unmistakably human gesture, and for the first time since this nightmare began, you don't see rage in its eyes. You see loneliness. Preston has woken up and is listening to your conversation with growing horror. Replace them. Replace them with what? You don't answer immediately because you're not sure you want to voice what you're thinking. But the evidence is right there in front of you. The creature's intelligence, its ability to plan and remember, its seemingly supernatural resilience. I think, you say carefully, that the Dogman isn't just one creature. I think it's a condition, something that can be passed on. The implications are staggering. If you're right, then everyone who's ever claimed to kill the Dogman didn't actually kill it. They just forced it to find a new host, and now it's trying to build a pack, recruiting descendants of its former killers to join it in whatever cursed existence it inhabits. Your radio suddenly crackles to life, startling everyone in the circle. Omar's voice comes through clearly, stronger than it was last night. Ranger 7, this is base. State police have reached the tower site. What's your current position? You grab the radio, hope flaring in your chest.
Base, We're at the Pine Ridge Burial Ground. 4 civilians with me, all alive. But we have a situation here that requires immediate assistance.
Roger that. Helicopter is en route to your location for extraction. ETA 15 minutes. 15 minutes. You look at the dog man, still watching patiently from beyond the stone circle. Will the helicopter's arrival force it to retreat? Or will it see the aircraft as just another threat to eliminate? As if reading your thoughts, the creature stands and walks closer to the circle's edge. When it speaks, its voice is like gravel mixed with wind, barely human but unmistakably intelligent. No more running. The words hit you like physical blows. The dog man can speak, has always been able to speak. Everything you thought you knew about this creature crumbles in an instant. What do you want? You ask, trying to keep your voice steady. Family, it says, the word dripping with loneliness that spans decades. Tired of being alone. Knox pulls his daughters closer, his face pale with understanding. You want to take our children? The dog man shakes its massive head. Want to give them purpose, power, forever. Now you understand the true horror of what you're facing. The dog man isn't just a monster. It's a corrupted form of immortality, a curse that grants eternal life at the cost of everything human. And it's been trying to share that curse with the descendants of those who've heard it. The people you took, you say, they're still human? Changing, the creature replies. Becoming, like me, like you, could be. The offer hangs in the air like poison. Eternal life, incredible power, but at what cost? You think about the photographs in the cave, about Cash Morrison and the others. Are they still themselves, or have they become something else entirely? The sound of helicopter rotors grows audible in the distance. The dog man hears it too, its ears swiveling toward the approaching aircraft. For the first time since dawn, it looks agitated. Choose, it says, fixing you with those golden eyes. Come, willingly, or I take them anyway. The sacred ground won't protect you forever, and you know it. The burial ground might keep the dog man at bay temporarily, but it can't hold off a creature with unlimited time and patience. Eventually, you'll have to leave this circle, and when you do, it will be waiting. But there might be another way. The photographs from the cave show symbols carved into the walls, the same markings that appear on the standing stones. If the burial ground has power over the creature, maybe those symbols are the key to understanding how to use that power. You make your decision. I'll come with you, you say, stepping toward the edge of the circle. But you let the family go, and you take me to where you're keeping the others. No. Knox jumps to his feet, grabbing your arm. You can't trust that thing. The dog man watches your approach with something like respect. When you reach the boundary of the sacred ground, it extends one massive clawed hand. Your word, you say, not moving any closer. Promise me they'll be safe. Safe, the creature agrees. Always safe. You have my word. You look back at Knox, Preston, and the girls one last time, then step across the stone circle's boundary. The moment your foot touches the ground outside the protected area, you feel it, a presence pressing against your mind, ancient and tired, and desperately lonely. The dogman's hand closes around yours with surprising gentleness. Its claws could tear you apart, but they barely leave marks on your skin. This close, you can see the intelligence in its eyes more clearly, along with something else, hope. The others, you say as the helicopter grows louder overhead. Show me. The creature nods and begins walking toward the forest, pulling you along. Behind you, you can hear Knox shouting your name, but you don't look back. This is the only way to save them, and maybe, just maybe, the only way to finally put an end to the dogman's century-long hunt. As you disappear into the trees, the last thing you hear is the helicopter landing in the burial ground. Come to rescue a family that no longer needs rescuing. But your own fate remains very much in question. The cave system beneath Howling Pines is vast and ancient, carved by underground rivers that dried up millennia ago. The dogman leads you through passages that seem to go on forever, lit by phosphorescent fungi that cast everything in an eerie green glow. Finally, you emerge into a large chamber where your worst fears and greatest hopes are confirmed. Cash Morrison is there, along with Carter Williams, Remy Patterson, and 24 others you don't recognize. They're alive but changed. Taller, stronger, with eyes that reflect light like animals. Still human, but becoming something else. You came, Cash says, his voice deeper than you remember. I was hoping someone would figure it out eventually. Figure what out, you ask? Though you think you already know. The Dogman isn't the curse, Cash explains, gesturing to the symbols carved into the chamber walls. The Dogman is what happens when the curse has no one left to share itself with. We're the cure. He shows you the truth in the ancient markings. The curse was created centuries ago by Native American shamans as a last resort against settlers who were destroying their land. But it was never meant to create a solitary monster. It was supposed to create a pack of guardians, protectors who would ensure the forest's survival. Instead, generation after generation of humans killed the transformed guardians, forcing the curse to jump from host to host, growing more lonely and desperate with each passing decade. So what happens now? You ask? Cash smiles, and for a moment, he looks completely human again. Now we have enough people to break the cycle. The Dogman doesn't have to be alone anymore, and the forest gets the protectors it was always meant to have. The transformation, when it comes, is surprisingly painless. You feel your senses expanding, your strength increasing, your connection to the forest deepening, until every tree, every stream, every living thing becomes part of your awareness. When it's over, you understand why the Dogman spent so many decades gathering his pack. The loneliness of carrying such a burden alone would drive anyone to desperate measures. But now there are enough of you to share the responsibility, to protect Howling Pines without the need for violence or fear. The disappearances will stop. The killings will end. And somewhere in the world above, families like Knox's will continue to camp and hike and fish, never knowing they're being watched over by guardians who were once human themselves. It's not the ending you expected when this nightmare began, but as you feel the last of your humanity merge with something larger and more ancient, you realize it might be the ending the forest always deserved. The Dogman, your predecessor, your teacher, your pack leader, finally allows himself to rest, knowing his vigil can continue in other hands, in other paws. The hunt is over. The protection has just begun. My name is Stanley Hayes, and I am 72 years old. The story I'm about to tell you happened about 5 years ago when I was working as a park ranger in Whispering Pines National Forest. Now I know what you're thinking. Being a park ranger sounds like a dream job, right? Leisurely strolls through the woods, rescuing the occasional kitten from a tree, and basking in the beauty of nature. Well, let me tell you, it's not all sunshine and wildflowers. There are things out there in the wilderness, strange and unexplainable things that no one warns you about when you sign up for the job. But before I get into all that, let me tell you a bit about myself. I grew up in a small town called Millbrook, nestled in the heart of Arkansas. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, and the biggest excitement was the annual Fall Festival. My childhood home was a modest 2-story house on the outskirts of town, backing up to a dense forest that seemed to stretch on forever. From as far back as I can remember, I was drawn to the outdoors. While other kids were glued to their TV sets or video games, I was out exploring the woods behind our house, building forts and pretending to be a great explorer. My dad, Robert Hayes, was an avid hunter and outdoorsman. He taught me everything he knew about tracking, survival skills, and respecting nature. Some of my fondest memories are of the two of us, trudging through the woods at dawn, watching the forest come alive around us. As I grew older, my love for the outdoors only intensified. It seemed natural to turn that passion into a career, and being a park ranger felt like the perfect fit. It wasn't about hunting or conquering nature, but about preserving it and helping others experience its wonder. So, after high school, I enrolled in a forestry program at the State University and never looked back. Fast forward a few decades and there I was, Senior Park Ranger Stanley Hayes, proud protector of Whispering Pines National Forest. It was a vast expanse of wilderness, covering over 1.2 million acres of diverse ecosystems, from towering pine forests to hidden waterfalls and deep, mysterious caves. Whispering Pines had it all, and for nearly 30 years, it had been my home away from home. The events I'm about to recount took place in mid-September, just as summer was giving way to fall. The weather was starting to cool down, bringing with it that crisp, invigorating air that always made the forest feel more alive somehow. The leaves were just beginning to turn, splashing the canopy with hints of gold and red. It was my favorite time of year, a time when the forest seemed to hold its breath, caught between seasons. On that particular day, I was on a routine patrol, just a standard check of the northern trails. The air was thick with the scent of pine and earth, a mixture I'd come to love over the years. It's the kind of smell that makes you feel alive, connected to something bigger than yourself. I had my usual gear with me, a radio clipped to my belt, a well-stocked first aid kit in my backpack, and my old trusty compass. I wasn't armed that day. Never felt the need to be, honestly. In all my years as a ranger, the most dangerous thing I'd encountered was a particularly ornery raccoon with a taste for campers' snacks. The day started normal enough. I checked a couple of campsites, making sure no one was leaving trash behind or disturbing the local wildlife. I chatted with a few hikers, giving them tips on the best trails, and reminding them of the park rules. It was the kind of day that reminded me why I loved my job so much. Being out in nature, helping people, and feeling like I was making a difference, however small. Around midday, I decided to head towards an old, less-traveled path in the northern part of the park. This trail had been closed off for a while due to some fallen trees, but it was on my list to check if the work crew had cleared it yet. As I made my way down the overgrown path, I noticed something odd. The usual symphony of forest sounds, birds chirping, leaves rustling, small animals scurrying about, was conspicuously absent. It was like the forest was holding its breath, waiting for something. I shrugged it off at first, figuring it was just one of those weird natural lulls that happen sometimes. But as I continued down the path, the silence began to feel oppressive, almost unnatural. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. After about an hour of walking, I came across something that stopped me in my tracks. There, nestled in a small clearing, was an old cabin. Now, I'd been working these woods for nearly 3 decades, and I knew every inch of this forest like the back of my hand. But this cabin? It wasn't on any of our maps, and I'd never seen it before in all my years here. The structure was clearly abandoned, its wood gray and rotting, windows shattered and empty. Vines had started to reclaim it, creeping up the walls and across the sagging roof. It had an eerie vibe about it, like something out of an old ghost story. But more than scared, I was curious. In my experience, abandoned structures in the middle of nowhere often held interesting stories and sometimes valuable historical artifacts. I approached the cabin cautiously, my boots crunching on the carpet of dead leaves that surrounded it. The porch creaked ominously under my weight as I made my way to the front door. It was hanging off its hinges, swaying slightly in a breeze I couldn't feel. I pushed it open, wincing at the loud groan of rusted metal. The interior of the cabin was a study in decay. A thick layer of dust covered everything, and cobwebs stretched from corner to corner like a macabre tapestry. The air was stale and musty, carrying the unmistakable scent of abandonment and rot. Sunlight filtered through the broken windows, illuminating dancing motes of dust and casting long shadows across the floor. Despite its dilapidated state, I could see that the cabin had once been someone's home. There was an old iron stove in one corner, a small table with 2 chairs in the center of the room, and the remains of what looked like a bed frame against the far wall. But what caught my eye was an old leather-bound book sitting on the table, its cover worn and pages yellowed with age. Curiosity piqued. I made my way over to the table, my footsteps echoing in the empty room. I picked up the book carefully, half expecting it to crumble to dust in my hands, but despite its age, it seemed relatively well preserved. I opened it gently, revealing page after page of handwritten entries. It was a journal. As I flipped through the pages, my eyes widened. The journal was filled with strange entries about local legends and sightings of a creature called the Vranid. The descriptions were vague and often contradictory, but it was clear that whoever wrote this believed wholeheartedly in its existence. One entry caught my eye. May 15, 1952. Saw it again today. The Vranid. It was down by Whispering Creek, just at dusk. Tall as a tree. It was, with limbs like branches and skin pale as moonlight. It moved so fast, silent as a shadow. I tried to follow, but it vanished into the mist. I know folks think I'm crazy, but I know what I saw. The Vranid is real, and it's out there watching us. The last entry in the journal mentioned something about a hidden cave deep in the forest where the Vronid supposedly lived. I couldn't help but chuckle, thinking it was just the ramblings of some old hermit with too much time on his hands and an overactive imagination. Still, something about the journal intrigued me. I decided to pocket it, figuring it'd make for an interesting read later. As I stepped back outside, the silence hit me again. It was even more pronounced now, an almost tangible weight pressing down on me. The shadows seemed longer, darker somehow, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I decided it was time to head back to the main trail and call it a day. That's when I heard it. A rustling noise coming from the dense underbrush to my left. It wasn't the normal sound of a small animal moving through the leaves. This was different. Bigger. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the silence. "Anyone there?" There was no answer. Just more rustling. Louder this time. I moved closer, my heart starting to beat a little faster. As I approached, the noise stopped abruptly. Everything went still again. I stood there for a moment, scanning the area, but saw nothing out of the ordinary, just trees and shadows. Shrugging it off as an animal, probably a deer, I turned to leave. That's when I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. A flash of movement, something tall and gaunt, slipping between the trees. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The rational part of my brain tried to explain it away. A trick of the light, a shadow, maybe a bear standing on its hind legs. But deep down, I knew I wasn't alone out here. Slowly, I backed away, keeping my eyes fixed on the spot where I'd seen the movement. I reached for my radio, intending to call for backup, but all I got was static. The signal was dead. Of course it was. I picked up my pace, trying to stay calm but feeling panic start to rise in my chest. The feeling of being watched grew stronger with every step. I kept glancing over my shoulder, but there was nothing there. Just trees and lengthening shadows as the sun began to dip towards the horizon. By the time I reached the main trail, I was practically jogging. That's when I saw it again, standing at the edge of the trail, partially obscured by the trees. It was tall, easily over 7 feet, with long gangly limbs and pale, almost translucent skin. Its eyes were dark and hollow, staring right at me. I froze, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It was like something out of a nightmare, like the creature from the journal had stepped right off the page and into reality. I took a step back, and it moved, matching my pace. That was all it took. I bolted, running faster than I ever had in my life. I could hear it behind me, its footsteps unnaturally quiet for something so large. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like lead. But I didn't dare stop. I could feel it getting closer. Up ahead I saw the ranger station, a small building where we kept supplies, and a more powerful radio. I pushed myself harder, praying I'd make it. I burst through the door and slammed it shut behind me, locking it for good measure. I grabbed the radio and tried to call for help, but it was still nothing but static. I cursed, banging it against the table in frustration. That's when I heard the scratching at the door. It was here, and it wanted in. I looked around frantically for a weapon, anything to defend myself with. There was an old hunting rifle mounted on the wall, a relic from the early days of the park. I grabbed it, checking to see if it was loaded. 2 rounds. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. The scratching turned into pounding, the door shaking on its hinges. I backed up, aiming the rifle at the door, my hands trembling. The wood splintered, and the door burst open. The creature stepped inside, its hollow eyes locked on me. I fired, the sound deafening in the small room. The bullet hit it in the shoulder, but it barely flinched. I fired again, this time aiming for its head. The creature staggered back, letting out a high-pitched shriek that made my blood run cold. It wasn't dead, but it was hurt. I didn't wait to see what it would do next. I bolted out the back door, running for my truck parked nearby. I jumped in and fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life, and I floored it, speeding down the dirt road. I glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting to see the creature chasing me, but there was nothing. Just the dark road behind me, and the deepening shadows of the forest. I didn't slow down until I was miles away. my heart still pounding in my chest. I made it back to the main ranger station and reported what happened, but no one believed me. They said I must have imagined it, that it was probably just a bear or something. I knew better. I'd seen the Vranid, and I knew it was real. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those hollow, dark eyes staring at me. I quit my job a week later, couldn't stand being in the forest anymore. I moved to the city, figuring there was safety in numbers. Years have passed, but I've never forgotten. I still have that journal, tucked away in a drawer. Sometimes, late at night, I'll take it out and read those entries, trying to make sense of what happened. But the truth is, I'll probably never know. The forest holds its secrets close, and some things are better left unknown. I've told this story a few times, but no one ever believes me. They laugh, say I've got a vivid imagination. Maybe they're right. Maybe it was just a bear, and years of solitude in the woods had finally gotten to me. But deep down, I know what I saw, and I know I'm not the only one. People go missing in those woods all the time, and not all of them are ever found. I still get nightmares, waking up in a cold sweat with the memory of those hollow eyes burned into my mind. I've tried to move on, to forget, but it's always there, lurking in the back of my mind. One night, not too long ago, I was watching the news and saw a report about a hiker who went missing in Whispering Pines. They found his campsite, but no sign of him. His friend said he just vanished without a trace. The authorities chalked it up to a wild animal attack, but I knew better. The forest has its own rules, its own ways of dealing with those who venture too deep. And the Vranid, it's part of that. It's the embodiment of the wild, untamed spirit of the woods. A reminder that no matter how much we think we've conquered nature, there are still things out there beyond our understanding. As I sit here, an old man now, far from the forests of my youth, I can't help but wonder, was it real? Did I really see what I think I saw? Or was it all just a product of an overactive imagination, and too many years alone in the woods? I don't know if I'll ever have the answers. But one thing's for certain, I'll never look at the forest the same way again, and neither, I suspect, will you. The weeks following my encounter in Whispering Pines were some of the most difficult of my life. I found myself jumping at every shadow, startling at every unexpected noise. Sleep became a luxury I could rarely afford, plagued as I was by vivid nightmares of hollow eyes and reaching, branch-like limbs. My colleagues at the ranger station treated me with a mixture of concern and skepticism. I could see it in their eyes. They thought I'd lost it. Old Stanley, gone off the deep end after too many years alone in the woods. I couldn't blame them, really. If someone had come to me with a story like mine, I probably would have reacted the same way. But I knew what I had seen. The image of the Vranid was burned into my mind, impossible to forget or explain away. I threw myself into research, spending hours poring over local folklore and legends, searching for any mention of a creature that matched what I had encountered. The journal I had found in the cabin became my constant companion, its weathered pages offering tantalizing hints but no concrete answers. It was during this time that I met Dr. Eleanor Blackwood, a professor of folklore and mythology at the State University. I had reached out to her department, hoping to find someone who might take my story seriously. To my surprise, she agreed to meet with me. Dr. Blackwood was a small, wiry woman with sharp green eyes and a shock of silver hair. She listened to my story without interruption, her face betraying no emotion. When I finished, she sat back in her chair, studying me intently. "Mr. Hayes," she said finally, her voice soft but firm. "I've heard many stories in my years of study, but yours is something different." I felt a glimmer of hope. "You believe me?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I believe that you believe what you saw. And I believe that there are things in this world that defy our understanding. What I can tell you is that your story bears striking similarities to legends I've encountered in my research." Over the next few hours, Dr. Blackwood shared with me tales from various cultures, Native American legends of forest spirits, European folklore about creatures that lurked in the deep woods, even modern urban legends about mysterious beings in national parks. The details varied, but the core remained the same: tall, otherworldly creatures that seemed to be guardians or embodiments of the wilderness itself. "The name Vranid," she mused, "I haven't encountered before, but the concept, That's as old as humanity's relationship with the wild. As fascinating as our discussion was, it left me with more questions than answers. Dr. Blackwood promised to look into it further and keep in touch. But as I left her office that day, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stumbled onto something far bigger and more ancient than I could comprehend. The next few months were a blur. I couldn't bring myself to return to work at Whispering Pines. The very thought of those dense woods filled me with a primal fear I couldn't shake. I took an extended leave of absence, citing stress and health concerns. My superiors were understanding, if a bit confused. I had always been the steady one, the reliable old-timer who never took a sick day. Now, I was a shell of my former self. I threw myself into research, spending countless hours in libraries and online forums, searching for any information I could find about creatures like the Vranid. I even reached out to other park rangers across the country, discreetly asking if they had ever encountered anything unusual in their forests. Most of the responses I got were polite dismissals or concerned inquiries about my well-being. But there were a very few, that gave me pause. A ranger in the Pacific Northwest who spoke of shadow people glimpsed between the trees. Another in the Appalachians who described finding inexplicable enormous footprints that disappeared into solid rock faces. Nothing concrete, nothing that could be proven, but enough to keep the embers of my conviction burning. It was during this time that the nightmares started to evolve. No longer was I simply reliving my encounter in the woods. Now I found myself lost in vast primordial forests, the trees towering so high their tops were lost in mist. And always I could feel eyes upon me. Not malevolent precisely, but utterly alien. Watching, waiting, judging. I would wake from these dreams drenched in sweat, my heart pounding, the scent of pine and damp earth so strong I could almost believe I was back in Whispering Pines. It was after one such night that I made my decision. I had to go back. The drive back to Whispering Pines was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Every mile closer made my palms sweat and my heart race. But I knew I had to face this. Had to know for sure if what I had experienced was real, or if I had finally cracked after all my years in the wilderness. I arrived at the ranger station early in the morning, before most of the staff had arrived. Jake, the night shift guy, was just about to leave when I walked in. He did a double take when he saw me. "Stanley, what are you doing here, man? Thought you were on leave." I forced a smile. Just came to pick up some things I left behind. "Mind if I grab my old gear?" Jake shrugged. "Sure thing. Good to see you, Stanley. You've been missed around here." As I gathered my old pack and gear, a wave of nostalgia hit me. This had been my life for so long. The familiar weight of the pack on my shoulders, the creak of my well-worn boots. For a moment I was tempted to just slip back into my old routine, to pretend that nothing had ever happened. But I couldn't. I knew what I had to do. I left a note for the chief ranger, explaining that I was going to do one last patrol of my old route. Then, with a deep breath, I stepped out onto the trail and into the forest. The woods were as beautiful as I remembered, dappled sunlight filtering through the canopy, the air rich with the scent of pine and wildflowers. For the first few hours, I almost managed to convince myself that everything was normal, just another day on the job. But as I approached the area where I had encountered the Vranid, the atmosphere began to change. The bird songs grew fewer and farther between. The air seemed to thicken, making each breath a conscious effort, and that feeling of being watched returned, prickling at the back of my neck. I found the old cabin easily enough. It looked even more decrepit than I remembered, as if it had aged decades in the months since I'd last seen it. The door hung open, swaying gently in a breeze I couldn't feel. With trembling hands, I pulled out my flashlight and stepped inside. The interior was exactly as I remembered it. Dusty, cobweb-covered, frozen in time. But the journal was gone. In its place was a single sheet of paper, yellowed with age. On it, in spidery handwriting, was a single sentence. "The Vranid watches. The Vranid waits. The forest remembers." A chill ran down my spine. I hadn't told anyone about the journal. How could this be here? That's when I heard it. A rustling from outside, too big to be a small animal. My heart began to race. Slowly, feeling as if I was moving through molasses, I turned towards the door. There, framed in the entrance, was a figure, tall, impossibly tall, with limbs like gnarled branches and skin as pale as birch bark. Its eyes, dark hollows in its face, fixed on me with an intelligence that was utterly alien, yet undeniably present. The Vronid. For a long moment, we stared at each other. I waited for the fear to come, for the panic that had gripped me during our last encounter. But instead I felt calm, as if I was in the presence of something ancient and powerful. Yes, but not inherently malevolent. Slowly, deliberately, the Vronid raised one long-fingered hand and pointed deeper into the forest. Then, as silently as it had appeared, it turned and walked away, its form seeming to melt into the shadows between the trees. I stood there for what felt like hours, my mind struggling to process what had just happened. Part of me wanted to run, to flee back to the safety of civilization and never look back. But a larger part, the part that had called me to the forest in the first place all those years ago, knew that I had to follow. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of the cabin and into the deepening shadows of the forest. Whatever lay ahead, whatever truths I might uncover, I knew that my life would never be the same. The forest had called, and I had no choice but to answer. As I ventured deeper into the unknown, following the path the Vronid had indicated, I couldn't help but feel that I was walking into something far bigger than myself. The forest around me seemed to pulse with an energy I had never noticed before, as if it was alive and aware in a way I had never understood. The trail I followed was barely visible, more of a game path than anything made by human feet. It led me through dense underbrush, over babbling streams, and past trees so ancient their trunks were wider than my arm span. All the while, I felt watched, guided, herded toward some unknown destination. As the day wore on and the light began to fade, I found myself in a part of whispering pines I had never seen before. The trees here were different, older, more gnarled, their branches reaching out like grasping fingers. Moss hung in thick curtains, and the ground was soft and spongy underfoot. And then, quite suddenly, I emerged into a clearing. At its center stood a massive oak tree, its trunk easily 20 feet in diameter. Its branches spread out in all directions, creating a canopy that seemed to encompass the entire clearing. But it was what was at the base of the tree that took my breath away. There, nestled between two enormous roots, was a cave entrance. It was perfectly round as if it had been carved by human hands, but I knew instinctively that no human tool had shaped this opening. Runes or symbols of some kind were etched around the entrance, glowing faintly with a light that seemed to pulse in time with the beating of my heart. As I stood there trying to make sense of what I was seeing, I felt a presence behind me. I turned slowly, already knowing what I would see. The Vronid stood at the edge of the clearing, its tall form blending seamlessly with the ancient trees. But it wasn't alone. As I watched, other figures emerged from the forest. Some were tall and spindly like the Vronid. Others were squat and gnarled like ancient tree stumps come to life. Some seemed to be made of mist and shadow, while others looked as solid as the rocks and earth. They formed a loose circle around the clearing, their otherworldly eyes all fixed on me. I should have been terrified, but somehow I wasn't. There was a sense of anticipation in the air, as if everything, the trees, the earth, these strange beings, even the very air itself, was waiting for something. The Vronid stepped forward, its movement fluid and graceful despite its gangly form. It raised one long arm, pointing towards the cave entrance. The message was clear. This was why I had been brought here. This was what I needed to see. With a deep breath, I stepped towards the cave. As I approached, the symbols around the entrance began to glow brighter. I could feel a thrumming energy emanating from within, like the heartbeat of the earth itself. I paused at the threshold, looking back at the assembled beings. The Vronid nodded, a surprisingly human gesture from such an alien creature. Taking another deep breath, I ducked my head and stepped into the cave. The moment I crossed the threshold, the world seemed to shift. The air became thick and heavy, filled with the scent of loam and ancient things. The walls of the cave were smooth, almost polished, and covered in more of those strange glowing symbols. As I ventured deeper, the cave opened up into a vast chamber. And there, in the center, was something that defied description. It was like a pool of liquid starlight, swirling and pulsing with colors I had no names for. Images flashed across its surface: forests, mountains, deserts, oceans. I saw creatures both familiar and utterly alien, civilizations rising and falling, the earth changing and evolving over eons. I understood then, in a moment of clarity that was both exhilarating and terrifying, what I was seeing. This was the heart of the forest. Not just whispering pines, but all forests, all wild places. It was the wellspring of life itself, the source of the magic and mystery that humans had sensed in nature since the dawn of time. And the Vranid, the other beings I had seen, they were its guardians, ancient spirits of the natural world, preserving and protecting this vital force from those who would exploit or destroy it. I don't know how long I stood there, lost in the swirling visions of the pool. It could have been minutes or days, but eventually, I felt a gentle touch on my shoulder. The Vranid stood beside me, its hollow eyes somehow conveying a depth of emotion I hadn't thought possible. Slowly, reverently, it reached out and touched the surface of the pool. The liquid light clung to its fingers, and as I watched, it turned to me and gently pressed its hand to my forehead. In that moment, everything changed. Knowledge flooded into me. The language of trees, the songs of stones, the whispered secrets of the wind. I saw the world as the Vranid saw it, as a vast interconnected web of life and energy. I understood the vital role that places like Whispering Pines played in maintaining the balance of the world, and I understood my part in it all. Why I had been chosen, why I had been allowed to see these wonders. I was to be a bridge, a translator between the world of humans and the ancient spirits of nature. It was a responsibility both thrilling and terrifying. When the vision faded, I found myself back in the clearing, the first light of dawn breaking through the trees. The other beings were gone, but the Vranid remained. It nodded to me one last time, then turned and melted into the forest. I made my way back to the ranger station in a daze, my mind reeling from all that I had experienced. I knew that my life had irrevocably changed, that I could never go back to being the man I was before. In the years since that night, I've done my best to fulfill the role given to me. I returned to my job as a park ranger, but with a new purpose. I've become an advocate for conservation, using my experiences to help others understand the true value and wonder of our wild places. I've worked with scientists and researchers, bridging the gap between empirical knowledge and the ancient wisdom I was given. It hasn't been easy. Many still don't believe me, think I'm just a crazy old man with wild stories. But that's okay. I know the truth, and I do what I can to protect it. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the moon is full, I'll venture deep into the woods of Whispering Pines. There, in the shadowy spaces between the trees, I'll catch glimpses of tall, otherworldly figures. A reminder that the world is far more vast and mysterious than we can imagine, and that the wild places still hold secrets beyond our understanding. So the next time you're in a forest, and you feel that prickle on the back of your neck, that sense of being watched, remember my story. Remember that there are guardians in the wild places, ancient and powerful. They're watching, waiting, protecting the heart of nature itself. And who knows, maybe, just maybe, they'll choose to reveal themselves to you too. But be warned, once you've seen the truth, there's no going back. The forest will forever call to you, its secrets whispering on the wind, inviting you to delve deeper into the mysteries of the natural world. It's a call that once heard can never be forgotten. And me, I'm just grateful for the glimpse I've been given, for the role I've been asked to play. I'm Stanley Hayes, former park ranger, now guardian of secrets and teller of tales. And this is my story.